C-SPAN 2. And now on Book TV, we're live with author and astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. Mr. Tyson is the director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City and the author of many books, including Welcome to the Universe, Death by Black Hole, and his latest, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry.
Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, in your new book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, you open it by saying that the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you. What does that mean?
Get over it. That's all. I think up until, really up till the year 1600, when we didn't have any particular tools to investigate the natural world, our five senses were the primary means by which we obtained all information about the universe. And not even knowing that our five senses had limits. If it's everything you know, you think it's everything the universe is trying to give you, but in fact it's not. And so around 1600 was the invention of the microscope in one direction, and then the telescope in the other direction, each invented within a decade of one another. Then all of a sudden, pieces of the universe come available to us that transcend our senses. The fact that Leeuwenhoek would look inside of a drop of pond water and see microorganisms just like doing the backstroke, right? That your eye-brain sensory system could not have detected were it not for the microscope. And you can say, does that make sense? That you could have entire living creatures inside of a drop of water. Well, today we know that because we learn it from childhood, but in the day, it made no sense at all. In fact, he had communication with the Royal Academy, Royal Society in London, which is what you would normally do when you make a discovery, and they thought he was drinking too much gin. It's like, write another letter when you've recovered from this stupor, from this drunken stupor, and then we can continue our scientific conversation. So they were in denial of it until they sent someone up to verify, which is a very natural thing to happen among scientists. One eyewitness testimony about one result is not a scientific discovery. You need verification of it to confirm that it's real. And especially in modern times, the 20th century and onward, we have particle accelerators. We discovered quantum physics, which has rules of how matter behaves that fall completely outside of not only your senses, but our expectations for how life would, how anything should work. Particles popping in and out of existence, matter turning into energy and back and forth. So then we discover like black holes and the expanding universe. How could everything there is be expanding at all, right? And so if you keep invoking, that doesn't make sense, you're going to miss out on a lot of what we have learned, discovered to be true about this universe.
What's significant about the year 1600? Anything?
Optics had taken there was a lot of the Dutch were very good at optics and lenses and this sort of thing, and we knew about what one lens would do. You can make a little magnifying glass out of it, but when you start combining them, you get other properties of your optical system, enabling you to get a microscope. And then once you did that, that just opened the floodgates to what else you would do when you combine lenses. And then Galileo made a really good version of it back in the early 1600s, and then sky's the limit as he looked up.
Was Galileo treated as a kind of a devil, in a sense?
Well, so there's a little bit of cleansing of, depending on how long is the write-up on the account of his life and times, that'll determine how much background information you'll get. So the simple story is he makes these discoveries. They conflict with the teachings of the Catholic Church. They put him on trial. They find him guilty of saying that Earth goes around the sun and not vice versa, as well as other discoveries he's made with his devil's instrument. And then they put him under house arrest. What they don't tell you, or they would tell you if you read a longer biography about him, is that he actually made fun of the Pope. Public fun of the Pope. He wrote a book in Italian, not in Latin, which is the academic language of the day, in Italian, which means the local people can read it. And in it, he invents a conversation between a simpleton and someone who was wise of the ways of the universe. And if you track the statements of the simpleton, they're all statements that have come by official decree from the Catholic Church. So he's really a pompous a-hole, basically. Can I say that?
Yeah, we're on camera.
This is C-SPAN. Can I do that? And so socially, he did not express the respect he really should have for people who had much more power over him. He could have published in Latin, had it spread around the world among academic circles, and I'm betting he probably would not have gone to trial. That's my read of this. And in the period, it's the Renaissance after all, new thought and fresh thought was not some weird thing. So, yeah, he was just, he had it coming because he didn't know how to appease authority.
Back to your book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. 14 billion years ago, the universe started, you say. How do we know? How do we know that?
So the way knowledge is acquired scientifically is you have an idea and you propose an experiment to test the idea. And then if it's an expensive experiment, you probably don't have the money to do it in your garage. So now you propose to get funding from sources. Typically, if it's pure research, it'll be a government source. The National Science Foundation, NASA has a research arm. If you're in the other fields like biology, human physiology, you might be getting a grant from the National Institutes of Health. And so you have this idea, you build an experiment, and you test it. And if the results of that experiment match your expectations, then the foundation of your idea gains some currency in the conversations you might have at the scientific coffee lounges, at workshops, or in the journals. Then you're a competitor of mine, and you say, I never liked you. I have a different, scientists are humans, we're people too, right? So, and I think you're wrong. And here's the experiment I'm going to build to show that you're wrong. So then you build an experiment, and then you get a result that kind of matches my result. Well, that's interesting, because you had no intent of matching me. You don't even like me. But now the results match, and someone else does it. You'll always have some outliers, just because of the experimental uncertainties that exist in all experiments. There'll always be some outliers. But when there's a general lean towards a truth, an emergent truth, you look back and you say, oh, okay, all of these experiments point to approximately the same result. And you have these few outliers here. So now we come to recognize that this is the new truth, the new objectively established truth. And that's what science does. It is the most effective way we have ever devised as a species, as a culture, in decoding what is and what is not true about the natural world. Nothing rivals it at all. And so once we've done this, then I say, here is how the world works. Then we go on to the next problem. And this is a celebrated thing. I mean, it's what got us relativity and quantum physics and gravity, and it empowered the entire industrial revolution. You couldn't have these machines. What is a machine? It's something that converts energy that lives as one form into energy that's useful to us in another form. So what is a car? It takes chemical energy and gas and turns it into energy of motion, kinetic energy, of your car. And that requires machines to do that. All this came out of the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, there were no machines such as this. They had what we call simple machines. A lever and a pulley. Those don't require high technology. Technically, in the world of physics, those are called machines. Okay, a lever, a pulley, an inclined plane. And what they do is they make your job a little easier. So it's simple. So watch how this works. So I have this ledge, and I have a very heavy thing, and I want to lift it up to that ledge. Well, I'm not strong enough to do that. But if I make a ramp, then I can just lift it up little bits at a time. Now the distance over which I have to lift it is longer, but it takes this height and spreads that out over time so that it makes it easier for me to complete the task. The same amount of total energy is exerted, but the rate at which I expend that energy is different. And that's what simple machines have always done for us. And modern machines basically empower all of civilization.
First 10 seconds of the universe, what happened?
Well, so there's some busy moments back. Oh, sorry, I didn't really focus in on your question about how do we know it's 14 billion years. So here's what we do. We look up in the universe and we say, okay, we see galaxies. Hubble discovered that these fuzzy things in the night sky are entire galaxies, such as our Milky Way. Major discovery in 1926. And then in 1929, he discovers that these fuzzy things that we now identify as whole galaxies are hurtling away from one another. And this is the first evidence that the universe is expanding. So people don't just think this up. Oh, it must be, no. It was an observation. And then we looked to see if it fit Einstein's general theory of relativity, and it did. General theory of relativity is the modern understanding of gravity. And if anything's happening in the universe, it's going to involve gravity. So you check to see if it works with his equations. It does. And so that means we didn't have to reinvent the theory of the universe because it worked. And so then we say, all right, if the universe is getting bigger, if the universe is bigger today than it was yesterday, and that must mean it was bigger yesterday than it was the day before, and then the day before, and then the day before. So what happens if we just turn the clock back? When you do this, because you see how fast we're expanding, just reverse that. You can do it on a pen and paper, on the back of an envelope. Just calculate what happens if you reverse this rate of expansion. And the whole known universe is in the same place at the same time 14 billion years ago. That is the origin of the idea of the Big Bang.
First 10 seconds.
First 10 seconds. So everything we know about matter that is compressed and under pressure tells us that the temperature will rise. And the simplest example of this is if you ride a bicycle and your tire gets a little flat. So you pump, a hand pump, you pump air into the bicycle tire. And then you feel the valve when you're done. It's hot. You are compressing air through it. Okay? And so that's just as an example. So it's related. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's related thermodynamically. The science of the movement of energy from one medium to another. It's called thermodynamics. So as the universe gets smaller and smaller, it actually would have been hotter in the past than it is in the present. And so now you keep, because the universe actually now has a temperature, you can measure it. Got measured in the 1960s. Very cool. You look in every direction and you see the heat signature left over after the 14 billion years. And so now you go back in time and you say, okay, the universe was hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. How much hotter would it have been 14 billion years ago when the universe was this big? And you get a stupendously high temperature. And now you ask, what is the behavior of matter and energy under those temperatures? So now you turn to the particle accelerators that slam particles together under high pressure, high energy, high temperature. So you start approximating the conditions of the early universe. Well, is that what an atom does? Is that what a nucleus does? Is that what happens? So now you take knowledge gleaned from modern atomic physics and particle physics, and you apply it to what's going on in the first few moments of the universe when it was hot, small, and dense. And that gives you a pathway of insights into what was going on there. You know what we find? That you have an era where all particles are formed, the basic foundational particles that everything else is comprised of. We have light in the form of photons. We have quarks that make up protons and neutrons. We've all heard of protons and neutrons. They're made of something else. They're made of what we call quarks. And as far as we know, quarks are fundamental, as far as we know so far. And also electrons. And they all have antimatter counterparts. An electron has an antimatter. It's called the positron. It's a very cool name, actually. Positron. Something that science fiction people rapidly picked up on. Just to be clear, we invented antimatter and discovered it. That was not a science fiction invention. Although it works great in science fiction storytelling, it happened in the real universe first. So now you bring your insights to those first few moments of the universe and say, what must have happened then, given what we know goes on in our particle accelerators? And it will tell you, at the rate we were expanding, at those temperatures, you would be making hydrogen as the predominant atom in the universe. It's the simplest atom. It has only one proton in the nucleus. You make this much hydrogen. You make this much helium that has 2 protons in the nucleus. You'll make trace amount of lithium. That's the 3rd element on the periodic table of elements you remember from chemistry class. And nothing else. We will be a universe born with hydrogen and helium and barely any lithium. Wait a minute. And you say, if that's so, it would mean that the very oldest stars we can find, ones born closest to the Big Bang, that would still be alive today, would be comprised of only hydrogen and helium. That is exactly what we measure. The very oldest stars have the least amount of heavier elements, which we know this from the mid-20th century, from calculations enabled by the nuclear research from the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb, because we're calculating what atoms do. We know that after that time, stars are born, pure hydrogen and helium. They manufacture heavy elements in their core. Then some of them explode, scattering this enrichment to gas clouds that have yet to form stars. Now they form a next generation of stars that have a little bit of extra enrichment. They'll make even more enrichment, explode, and then carry that extra enrichment to the next generation. And this continues through. Our solar system, was born 4.5 billion years ago. So that's more than 9 billion years after the start of the universe. So we've had the benefit of multiple generations of enrichment. So now when our protocloud collapsed to make the sun, it had all these other ingredients in it that it used to make planets. Because rocks are not made of hydrogen. They're not made of helium. They're made of silicon and oxygen and aluminum and arsenic, all these other iron, cobalt, nickel, all of that manufactured later is in abundance in very late generation stars that were formed. So the lesson here is, however weird it is to assert that 14 billion years ago the universe was this big, literally this big, and exploded from there. You say, well, you weren't there, how do you know? Okay, you're right, I wasn't there. But if everything we know happens to matter, happened then it accurately predicts things we do measure. That's what gives us the confidence to sit here and describe the first 10 seconds of the universe like we were there.
And it all started with the Big Bang.
Is there a song in there?
Do we know what that Big Bang was?
Do we know what it was?
Yeah.
What we can tell you is that the Big Bang account of the beginning of the universe is a description of what matter and energy was doing from the earliest moments onwards. Now, there's a point before which it's a little mysterious to us. It's called the Planck time, named after Max Planck, one of the many fathers of quantum physics. There's a point earlier than which it's kind of the limits of our ability to understand what nature is doing. So we pick it up right after that Planck time. I forgot the Planck time is like 1 trillionth of a second. after the Big Bang. No, trillion, 1 billion trillion trillionth. Is that right? 15, 12, 24. Yeah, that's about right. 1 million trillion trillionth of a second after whatever was the beginning. Then our physics that we now measure in our labs apply. And then we can talk about what's going on.
In your book, Welcome to the Universe, from 2016, you write that in 5 billion years, the Earth will be a charred ember.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's weird. Every now and then I tweet that. Every couple of years, I tweet that. And apparently it blows people's minds. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but so the tweet goes, it varies anytime I do it, but it goes something like this. In 5 billion years, the sun will expand so large that it will engulf the entire orbit of our planet. That'll engulf the entire, it will engulf Earth as Earth, and Earth will be a charred ember as it descends into the star while it vaporizes. Have a nice day, or something like that. And people, so it's just a reality. I mean, it's remarkable that we can know our fate in that way over that much time. But how do we know it? Will we be there? Probably not. So how do we know? Well, there are other stars. There's no shortage of stars in the universe. We can see stars being born. We see stars living out their lives. We see stars in the act of dying. And you can staple these bits of information together and create a coherent story. In other words, we don't live long enough to see a star born, live out its life, and die. It takes millions and sometimes billions, and in some cases trillions of years. And we're around for a few decades. So how is it that we know this? Because there are so many stars that in any snapshot of the universe, we see stars being born, stars in middle age, stars dying. And we look to see, oh, that's the same arc of a star. They're just different stars, but we're catching it at different times. It wouldn't be any different from if you were an alien and took a snapshot of civilization. You would see some humans in a box underground. You'd say, well, what are they doing there? And you see other humans who are like little things crawling on the carpet. You'll see other humans who don't have any hair, that are little, and others that don't have any hair who are older, right? It's just a snapshot, because you don't live long enough to see the whole thing. If you're an alien and you live just 90 seconds, all right? So you'll say, how do I make sense out of this? Are people born in a box in the ground, and they're all shrivelly, and then they come out of the box, and then they get littler and littler and littler, and then disappear inside of another person? Or is it the opposite? So you keep studying all these photos that you have, and then you can piece together a coherent story of what's going on. And for the stars in the universe, this took decades. We didn't just look at one snapshot and say, oh, that's born there and dies there. No, this took effort. This was major telescopes being brought to bear, and a lot of human capital, intellectual capital invested in trying to understand what stars are and how and why they work. And a lot of this traces back to the Harvard College Observatory in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where there's a room full of then computers. These are human calculators, computers, and they're all women, because that was judged to be menial work. And the men stayed in their offices, doing high-level thinking. And in this room of women was the foundation of our understanding of stellar evolution. And Davis Sobel, you should get her on this, just wrote a book on this. I think we call it The Glass Universe. I think
you've covered it.
You've covered it, yeah. Just as an homage to the glass ceiling, the glass universe. Little did the high and mighty men know that when you calculate data that was collected from all the world's telescopes on stars, therein was the source of the seeds of how and why stars are born, live out their lives, and die.
And this is Book TV on C-SPAN 2. This is our monthly in-depth program, and this month we have author and astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson as our guest. As you know, if you watch this program, we spend 3 hours with one author talking about his or her body of work, and this month it's Dr. Tyson. Beginning in 1989, Dr. Tyson has written several books. Merlin's Tour of the Universe was his first. Universe Down to Earth came out in 1994. Just Visiting This Planet, 1998. The Sky Is Not the Limit. That was his fourth book, 2000. One Universe also came out in 2000. And then Cosmic Horizons came out in 2001. Origins came out in 2004. Death by Black Hole, 2007. The Pluto Files, 2009. Space Chronicles, 3 years later. And then last year, Star Talk came out, as well as Welcome to the Universe, and his most recent book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. If you'd like to participate in our program this afternoon, here's how you can do so. We'll put the phone numbers up. 202 is the area code. 748-8200 for those of you in the East and Central time zones. 748-8201 if you live in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. Go ahead and start dialing in. Now, if you can't get through on the phone lines, still want to ask a question or participate in our program, try us on social media. @BookTV is our Twitter handle. You can also make a comment on our Facebook page. You'll see Dr. Tyson's picture there. Just make a comment right underneath. Facebook.com/BookTV. And finally, email booktv@cspan.org. And we'll begin taking those in just a few minutes. Dr. Tyson, back to your most recent book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. 40 billion Earth-like planets in the Milky Way alone. I've got two questions. What is the Milky Way? And how big a space are we talking about? 40 billion Earth-like planets.
Yeah, so it was hard-earned to learn what the Milky Way was. Consider that term that we use dates from ancient Rome. Rome, when they built streets, they didn't call them streets, they called them ways, the Appian Way, for example. And you look up in the night sky and you see this milky band of light, and they just call it the Milky Way, the Milky Street, literally. And in China, where milk is a less popular beverage into adulthood, they don't call it the Milky Way, they call it the Silver River. And so this is a well-known feature in the night sky. Imagine to just be some cloud of light crossing from one horizon to the next. And it would not be until Galileo and other large telescopes brought to bear on this question did we learn that when you put a telescope on the Milky Band of light, it reveals itself into stars, countless stars, that without a telescope are just so far away the light sort of puddles together. So we say, wow, all right. But is this all there is? Just stars in front of our face and then the stars that are far away that make this band? It would take until 1920 before we resolved the debate about whether the spiral fuzzy things in the night sky were actual other galaxies separate from our Milky Way. That got resolved very quickly after 1920, and especially with Hubble's observation that these are other entire galaxies beyond the Milky Way. And so we now know there's nearly 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe, and each galaxy has hundreds of billions of stars on average. And so there's a range, big galaxies, little galaxies, but when you count them up, 100 billion stars per galaxy, 100 billion galaxies. And there you have the observable universe, and these are scattered throughout the landscape like cities dotting a countryside when viewed from space, the local areas of light.
You've mentioned him a couple times, Edwin Hubble. Who was he?
Well, so there's the telescope, of course, after whom Edwin Hubble, the telescope was named after Edwin Hubble. He was a bit of a pompous, kind of snooty astrophysicist back in the early part of the 20th century. He did his best work in the 1920s. he had access to the biggest telescope. So that always leaves open the question, would anybody with access to the world's biggest telescope be making the world's greatest discoveries, or does it also require some kind of insight to empower you to even know what question to ask? So for him, it's probably a combination of both. But the stories about him, he wear these sort of tweed suits and smoked a pipe and donned a partly British accent when he's from, like, from backwoods America. So, but anyhow, a good thing about science, your personality is completely irrelevant to the quality of the work that comes out of your lab. And so you can praise someone's work without that having to be being praiseworthy of the person themselves. You can just separate the two. So he worked for the Carnegie Observatories in California. And yeah, I think back then, if they figured out that they should have, they would have given him a Nobel Prize for these discoveries. But astronomer types didn't start getting a Nobel Prize until the 1960s. So it would be the Nobel Prize in Physics given to an astrophysicist. So we get them maybe once a decade or so for something we do.
You use this example in Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. You talk about the Earth as an apple, and then the skin of the apple is basically where we've traveled, in a sense. And I'm probably getting it a little wrong.
Oh, yeah, so I can tighten that up. So we think to ourselves that here we are walking around on the surface of a planet, and we're at the bottom of this ocean of atmosphere. Okay? Whereas the thickness of the functional thickness of our atmosphere is to the size of the Earth what the skin of an apple is to an apple, what the shellac is to a schoolroom globe that's on that schoolroom globe. So this atmosphere is not some infinite extent of air molecules. It is a fragile, thin skin on this thing we call Earth. And I can quantify this for you. The atmosphere has particles associated with it that go up thousands of miles. But the part that, when I said it's functional thickness, because it's not an edge. There's not atmosphere on this side, not on that side. No, it fades. But you can say at what distance. So in the daytime, how come you can't see stars? You can ask that question. And you say, well, because the sun is out. No, that's not why you can't see stars. It's not because the sun is out. You can't see stars because we have an atmosphere. And the atmosphere scatters sunlight, rendering itself aglow. So in the daytime, our atmosphere glows sky blue. And that prevents you from seeing the stars in the daytime sky. If you go to the moon, you can be in broad daylight, but there is no atmosphere. And you look away from the sun, have your eyes adapt. There's the full nighttime sky. So you can ask the question, what altitude above the Earth do you have to travel before the atmosphere is so thin that you can see stars in the daytime? And that's 100 kilometers up, about 62 miles. And so that's the functional definition that we invoke about being in space. And that 62 miles is what is the skin of an apple to an apple, as is our atmosphere to the size of our planet.
How far out have we gotten from the Earth?
So we've gone to the moon.
Well, with satellites or anything?
Oh, much farther. Okay, but humans, we've gone to the far side of the moon when the moon's orbit around the Earth is not a perfect circle. So sometimes it's farther. It's like an ellipse. So Apollo 8? Was it Apollo 13? I think it was Apollo 13. Went to the moon when the moon was near its farthest point from the Earth. And they went around the moon before they made their trajectory. They never landed. They wanted to, but they had their oxygen tank got destroyed. So on the back side of the moon, in that trajectory, they were the farthest humans had ever been from Earth. And so how far is that? About 240,000 miles away. So in terms of spacecraft, The Voyager spacecraft just a few years ago launched in 1977, given some gravity boosts, but slingshotting around Jupiter and Saturn, and I forgot the exact comment, but it was multiple planet, multi-cushion pool shot to exploit the orbital energy of these various planets, because we couldn't launch it with enough energy to escape the solar system. It had to steal energy from planets in order to make this happen. And we did this quite on purpose. So you do this, the Voyager 1 has now basically left all traces of the solar system. So it doesn't mean going just past Neptune, the last planet in the solar system. There's like comets beyond that, the Kuiper belt of comets, of which Pluto is a happy member. You go beyond and beyond and beyond, and you reach a point where the sun's influence on the electronics of your spacecraft are now confused with the influence of everything else in the galaxy. And that's a functional place to say you have left the solar system. And Voyager has done just that. And how far away? Oh, I forgot the number. Several hundred times the Earth-Sun distance. But I forgot. I'd have to look that number up. But it's far. It's the farthest it's out there.
And still producing.
Well, yeah, but you have to ask, are we still learning anything? And what is it costs money to always keep something online and to keep talking to it. And by the way, we go through these funding episodes often. You have something that's kind of working, but it's exhausted its useful life, but it's still taking money. Do you shut this off and then get a fresh project that will have new questions that you're answering? Or do you keep this going because you know it still works and you might discover something? So we have what are called senior reviews each year, where some of the most respected among us get together and decide what switch gets turned off and what switch gets turned on. And that's why it's important that it's our most respected scientists among us, because then we judge that they are being fair in these assessments. So the Voyager spacecraft, farthest thing we've ever sent. And by the way, at the rate at which it's traveling, if you aimed it to the nearest star, it would take 70,000 years to get there. So give up all expectations that we're going to be visiting other planets outside of our solar system anytime soon.
1973, how'd you end up in the Mojave Desert?
Oh, yeah, 73. So I attended a camp, a special astronomy camp for like geeky school kids. I was in 73, I was in 9th grade. Yeah, so that was my first year in high school, because back then, what they called, I was transitioning from 9th grade to 10th grade. And 9th grade was the oldest grade in my junior high school. Today they call them middle schools, and they end at 8th grade. But anyhow, so I was transitioning between the two. I was a geeky kid, as was every other kid at this camp. We lived in the Mojave Desert, far away from any lights, very low atmospheric humidity, which is one of the definitions of a desert. And so that means there's no cloud formation, very few clouds, and we all lived nocturnally. And you wake up at night, and there's a whole slew of telescopes. We all had research projects, and computers were very early at the time. And so we were programming this, we hovered around this computer, and we all tried to program it. One of us programmed it to spew out prime numbers, which is an iterative calculation we made it do. Yeah, this is early. This is like computation BC. So those were some formative years of my life. 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, transitioning out of middle school into high school. I attended the Bronx High School of Science, the borough that I grew up in. And so I had a telescope and a camera. And so, yeah, I was just, that was a happy summer. Oh, by the way, as a city kid, that was my first time in the desert. And there were all these like creatures at night. There was like, tarantulas and black widows and, not tarantulas, black widows and what's the one with the scorpions. They said, don't put your foot in your boot until you shake out the boot. Otherwise, you'll get venom injected into your, it's like, okay, take me back to the city where I just might be mugged, that's all. At least At least I could talk to the mugger, you know. But it was fun. It was fun, and my mother saw an ad for this camp, and she knew that I had been interested in the universe for the previous 5 years of my life. And then why would I know where to even look for an ad or even have that as an ambition? So my parents were particularly sensitive to what the interests were of me, my brother, and my sister. So they didn't impart interest upon us. They carefully observed where we expressed interest and then fed those interests in whatever way best served our curiosity.
That was Cyril and Sanchita?
Yeah, Cyril Tyson, Sanchita Tyson. Right, I just lost my father this past
in December.
December, yeah.
Right.
He was 89, so it was a full life, but I still miss him. He was a wise man, and I think in modern times we forget what wisdom is. You know, there are people who know a lot and they talk a lot, and they're pundits, and wise people don't talk a lot. They do more observing than talking. And then somewhere in their head, mixed with their life experience, they digest it and then come out with simple, easy to understand perspectives that then sort of live with you. Of course they'll live with you because they're the digestion of so many different pieces that you didn't necessarily have access to. But they did because they've lived longer than you and they're observant their whole lives.
2012, your book Space Chronicles came out, and in that book, on page 234, you write that our nation is turning into an idiocracy.
Was I that harsh?
I'll pull up page. That's why I wrote the page number, just in case you question that you wrote that.
Yeah, okay, sure. I'm normally softer with my critiques than that. Normally, the way I would present such a statement would be, we are behaving this way in these situations. If that continues, we would then become a nation, an idiocracy. That's generally how I would word that. So I would double check after. At 3:01, when the cameras shut off, I'm going to check.
I'm going to do it right now while you're talking.
So I think if people don't, or they stop valuing discovery. Oh, just for as backdrop for Space Chronicles, Facing the Ultimate Frontier. If I can just tell a brief backstory to that. We've got 3 hours, so I'm assuming I could. Let's see how I worded that.
It.
Okay, nation is turning. For example. Okay. So you got it.
Did I misquote you?
No, it's verbatim. Verbatim. So thank you. So an idiocracy, in the context in which I've discussed it, it's not a system where people simply don't know things. Okay? If you don't know something, there's no crime in that. Maybe you didn't study it. Maybe you didn't spend 16 years in school and you spent only 12 or 20 years in school, as some people do to get advanced degrees. So, as an educator, I will never hold someone's absence of knowledge against them. The problem arises if you have an absence of knowledge and you either know, or worse, don't know that you have this absence of knowledge, and then you have power over legislation that should be informed by that knowledge and is not. And then you come to it aggressively in your ignorance. That is a recipe for societal disaster. So part of what it is to be educated is to have a keen sense of when you don't know something. And you either do the homework yourself. You know, just because you're not in school doesn't mean you can or shouldn't do homework, right? Just because you're not in school doesn't mean you shouldn't keep learning. So that's an obvious point to the viewers of Book TV, of course. But for the general population, consider how many people you know who might have run down the steps on the last day of school and then throwing their notes in the air. School's out. Whether or not it's the last day of school because they're graduating, even just any other year up until graduation. Summer, I don't have to learn anymore. And where does that come from? How is it that your time in school can lead you to celebrate being out of school? What's that about? What is missing in the educational pipeline that people resent being in school? What is missing where in college you attend a lecture, but the word lecture outside of college is otherwise a bad word? Stop lecturing me. I don't want to be lectured. It's a bad word. What's going on? So maybe what we're missing in the educational system is a reminder that it can be fun to learn. And the last day of school, people should walk down the steps sad that now there's an entire summer where they won't be learning. What a world that would be. Oh my gosh. So do we teach it differently? Are we selecting our teachers the right way, or the curriculum? I don't have an answer for that. I'm simply sharing the observation. And I know that's not helpful to just point it out, but I would claim a lot of the world's problems would be solved if education became a joyous experience rather than something you want to escape from as quickly as possible. So in Idiocracy, of course, I draw that word from the film. It was an indie film called Idiocracy. You might be able to Netflix it or something. But it was a world where the people in charge did not fully understand the consequences of the decisions they were making. And the absence of understanding came from an absence of awareness of how nature works. And there's a scene where they're feeding Gatorade to plants because the ads for Gatorade said it replenishes your nutrients. So they think, well, if it works for us, I bet it works for our plants. And they just pour you just got to see official government decisions that had little or no anchor in reality. Yet everyone kind of thought it was the right thing to do. So, in Space Chronicles, Facing the Ultimate Frontier, it contains an exploration of all the elements of society that might not be in a position to judge or make an informed decision about the value of space exploration going forward.
And that was in 2012. Just recently in the Wall Street Journal, an article by an op-ed by Crispin Sartwell. This is a quote. In the Trump era, says celebrity physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, who adds that this is the most important thing he's ever said, people, quote, have lost the ability to judge what is true and what is not.
Okay, so that sentence, that was from a video that was posted just before the Science March. That sentence did not include reference to Trump at all. That was added in that editorial. I just said, we live in a time where people have lost the ability to judge what is true and what is not. And if you want to call the pre-election era part of a Trump era, okay. But if you're looking at something on the internet and you think it's true and do not have the capacity to judge whether it's not true, that is another element, that is another ingredient in the recipe for disaster. So Trump is a manifestation, the Trump era, where what is true and what is not and where almost that distinction is not made, where that has risen to high heights. I would claim those seeds were germinating long before. And it has to do with what people think is true after they read it on the internet. Our susceptibility to this. And here's something else. Again, I hate to sound like a broken record, if anyone remembers what a broken record is, that in K through 12, somewhere in there, rather than pouring knowledge into people's heads and declaring them to be educated for having done so, somewhere in there we need to train people how to think, how to analyze, how to interpret, how to be skeptical of information, and then how to recognize when sufficient data has been put forth to turn something that you might be skeptical about into something that is a newly established objective truth. That is not taught in the schools. This should be a class just on what science is and how and why it works. And that would transcend the physics class, the chemistry class, the biology class, the geology class, the general science class. This would be its own course. So that when you are college educated and some institution has declared you graduated and a learned member of society, if you turn around and say, I choose not to believe this emergent scientific consensus, no, you don't have that option. It's not how objectively established scientific truths are determined. It is true whether or not you believe in it. And in retrospect, you think maybe that's what you should base legislation on. Not something you want to be true or feel should be true, or something that you don't allow to be true because your religion prevents it or because your political philosophy prevents it. You don't have that option if it's an objectively established truth. And like I said earlier, that is the entire point of the scientific enterprise. Knowing what is true, what is not, and in particular, because like I said, scientists are humans too, and we have bias, and we have all the stuff that goes on with every other human in this world also touches scientists. So we built a system to double check against that. If I am biased, and my bias shows up in some result, because I took some data and not others, and I could have done it this way and not, somebody else is going to get famous for checking my result and showing that I'm wrong. Well, Tyson is wrong. He messed up here. And if it's shown that my bias did influence it, I get a demerit. That's not a real thing, but it will interfere with the next time I have an interesting result and I want people to pay attention to it. So there's a huge cost if a scientist is somehow meddling with their data because they have an idea of what they want their data to show. It comes at a huge cost to their career. But even if they think they can get away with it, somebody else will ultimately find it. And if they show that it's wrong, then we don't have any result at all, and everybody's back to the drawing board. So objective truths, I'm thinking that's what any law or legislation should be based on. If you base it on anything else, then you are imposing what might be your personal truth. Your your personal truth is everyone should fend for themselves and not get a government handout. Let's say you feel really strongly about that. Well, that's how you feel. And in a free country, go right ahead. If you want everyone else to feel that, that's politics. Fine. Go have that political discussion in the floor of Congress, because that'll affect where monies go. Do you fund this support program? Do you not? Do you put in a tariff? Do you subsidize? Do you not? That's a political conversation. Go right ahead. And then the law that comes out will have political flavor to it. I don't have a problem with that. But if your law somehow pivots on something that is not scientifically true, you're building a house of cards where the first two floors look stable, but they're completely hollow and empty. And by the time you put on a third floor, the whole thing collapses. Nature is the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner of what is true.
Space Chronicles 2012. We need to go back to the moon.
I will not say what we need to do. All I will do, because I'm not a pundit trying to get everyone to agree with an opinion I might have. What I do instead, oh, by the way, Space Chronicles is a collection of everything I've ever thought and written on space exploration. And so it contains like op-eds and articles and speeches. It's an amalgam. And so you can dip. It's very easy to dip in and out of. But I'm not going to tell you we should go to the moon. No. What I'm going to say is that highly ambitious exercises conducted by governments exhibit huge force on the ambitions of a nation, on the creativity of a nation, on the innovations of a nation. I don't think it's an accident that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were 12 and 14, whatever, somewhere around there, when we landed on the moon. How impressionable can you be? Can you get? There it is. There's a future. And you see this. And you don't even have to be interested in space. You just have to be interested in the fact that new frontiers are being breached, and it's possible to do so. And then it gets infused into your goals, into your trajectory of life. So I'm offering space exploration, be it the moon, Mars, beyond, doesn't matter. But if you go into space, it is adventurous. It is, you have to invent stuff to make that. If you're advancing a frontier, you're going to have to invent something, because you can't just use off-the-shelf things. You're going to have to use and invent things that have never been used or invented before. That takes ingenuity, innovation, clever engineers, scientists working together. And you might even need clever lawyers. Why? Because, I want to live on the moon. Well, who owns that plot of moon surface? Am I homesteading? I want to mine an asteroid for natural resources. Who owns the asteroid? Should anyone own the asteroid? These are legal questions. That's a whole legal frontier. So everyone can become a participant in this. And when that happens, the government does it first because the government doesn't have to satisfy a quarterly report. The government can open new industries as it's done before, as it did with aviation. The government, monies from the government prompted innovations in aviation in its earliest days. Because I'm saying, an airplane, now we can carry mail through the air. Who wants the contract? And you say, I want the contract. I can carry 4 bags of mail. And somebody else says, well, I'm using the same plane as you, but I can make a modification. I can make the hull a little bigger. I can carry more fuel. And they show I can carry 6 bags of mail. And so there was a race to see who would then get these government contracts to carry airmail. And what happens? The 5th person says, I can carry 30 bags of whatever. I'm making up these numbers, but the sense of it is correct. And 30 bags of mail, they said, wait a minute, I don't need to carry mail. I can just put chairs. Now I can sell seats. And thus is born an entire industry of aviation because of certain investments that a government makes that then enable subsequent entrepreneurs to exploit the new place that the technology has been taken. So we go into space. I'd say you have a whole suite of launch vehicles. And where do you want to go today? You want to mine an asteroid? That's fine. Put these 2 rockets together, and you bring all your own equipment, because I don't know how to dig on an asteroid, but you'll know. There you go. You're a biologist? You want to look for life on the surface of Mars? Strap these together. There's a big rocket and this, and there you go. Well, you want a tourist jaunt around the moon? That's these rockets. And all of a sudden, the solar system becomes our backyard. Again, to do all this requires huge levels of innovation. But I would claim that once there's a first round of innovation that can establish the cost and the risks and the returns on investment, then private enterprise comes in, and then they do their thing, as they always do. No different from the Dutch East India Trading Company coming in after Christopher Columbus, who himself was sent by Spain. And he comes back and says how long it took. You can quantify things that then you can make a business case to exploit. If you can find another way to infuse an entire nation, world, with ambitions of tomorrow, that'll trigger innovations of today, thereby assuring a future of health, wealth, and security, because that's coming from technology. It's not coming from any other branch of human existence, but science and technology are going to give us tomorrow's health, wealth, and security. I'm simply offering the exploration of the universe as a force of nature operating on our innovations, on our urge to innovate. If you have something else, bring it in. I'm not going to, if it works and it works better, go ahead. I've yet to hear of a better example.
Another quote from Space Chronicles: NASA operates on our hearts, on our minds, on the educational pipeline, all for 1/2 cent on the tax dollar. About a $20 billion a year.
Yeah, so if you just take $20 billion and divide it by the budget, I forgot is it 3 trillion, 4 trillion, whatever the number is. If you run the numbers, it comes into about a 1/2 penny on the tax dollar. And if you hold up a literal dollar and then take scissors and cut 1/2 of 1% of its width, you don't even get into the ink from the side of the dollar. And when people say, why is NASA spending all this money up there when we have problems here on Earth? And that's assuming that if you took all the money we spent on NASA and then applied them to the problems on the Earth, that all the problems would get solved. That very statement kind of presupposes that. Yet, most of those people who utter that sentence do not actually know how much NASA is getting. I've done it like people on the street, right? So you ask the people who complain about NASA, I say, well, here's a tax dollar. How much do you think they're getting? Oh, 10%, 15%, 5%. No, 1/2 of 1%. When I tell them that, I didn't know that. It's that 1/2 of 1% that made the space station and the space shuttles and the Hubble telescope and all the NASA centers and the Cassini mission, which is now at Saturn. All of this is in the 1/2 of 1% on a tax dollar. So I ask you, I pose the question to you, how much is the universe worth to you?
All right, one more observation, and then we're going to take your calls. You've been very patient. We've spoken for an hour now. We've got 2 hours to take calls and hear from Dr. Tyson. First, I want to show this, and I'm not getting it right. There are 4 books you have here: The Pluto Files, Death by Black Hole, Space Chronicles, and Origins. What's special about these 4 books?
They did this, and I was very impressed at the publisher.
Norton?
Yeah, the publisher Norton. So these 4 different books, and they all have different covers. Okay, very kind of spacey covers, as you might expect, because all the books are on the universe. And so they decided to make the bindings match up into a coherent
I just couldn't
image.
get it
So
right.
this is the famous Ring Nebula. I don't know if you can see it. Let me get this.
If you just
hang on, I'll get it. There we go. What? And that. Aha. So it's the Ring Nebula. And
which is what?
It's the death throes of a star. Our sun will look something like that. So in the center of this is the remains of a star that once was, and its outer layers expanded into oblivion. And so now these have expanded hugely, much bigger than what is the extent of our orbiting planets. And so there are tons of these in the night sky. That's how we know how stars die. This is one way. This is a non-explosive death. We have examples of explosive deaths, and they're much rattier. They're much gorier. It really looks like stellar guts spewed forth, whereas this is rather stately and beautiful, like a smoke ring. So yes, and I have to get all 4 books.
Put them in the right order, which I couldn't do. Well, let's begin with a question via email. Mm-hmm. This is from a young man named Bradley Knighton. His parents both work at C-SPAN, long time. Dave and April both work at C-SPAN for a long time.
Wait a minute, did you give them preference to get their question first?
Well, you know what? I might have gotten this email directly, yes. And this is from April, and she says, my son Bradley, who's 11, has a question for Dr. Tyson. Here's the question. When going to a different planet, what aspect of traveling will be most important?
So, great question, and there's a lot of thinking about this, especially at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, NASA's headquarters for sort of the manned spaceflight. It's now called crewed, C-R-E-W, crewed spaceflight. So they worry about food. not only is there enough food, but will you like the food? If you get bored with the food, will that affect your morale? And then you're less effective doing other tasks. Do you need comfort food? Do you want exotic food, international food? The water supply. Is there enough water? Do you recycle the water? If you recycle the water, that means it collects all of your urine, filters it, and then you drink it back. Is that too freaky for you to do? Is that, water is not uncommon in the universe, but in space it's hard to get to. You got to like lasso a comet if you want a whole supply of fresh water, and we don't know how to do that. Other things, the time in a close quarters with only 1 or 2 or 3 other people, months and months, and in some cases years. There's a whole psychological dimension to that. Can we remain emotionally stable over those times? On Earth, people kill one another. They get into fights. There are many, even in the film Interstellar, there's an astronaut fight scene, which was like, who ordered that? But nonetheless, they showed it. And of course, there's 2 guys in astronaut suits fighting on an alien planet. So there's that. There's, will they miss their family or their loved ones at home? There's the fact that if you fly without creating artificial gravity, that you are weightless the whole time. Are you perpetually motion sick? Or do you get used to it? And if you get used to it, are there any other factors on the body? Your body expects one gravity, one G, we call it, which is the equivalent of Earth's surface gravity. And if you go in a centrifuge, that you can increase the gravity with a centrifuge. But through space, if you can create artificial gravity, good. If you can't, what is it like to be weightless for a year en route to your destination or longer? We already know some of the answers to that. You begin to lose bone density. You have the bones of a frail old woman if you keep this up. So they have to figure out what exercise will give you the kind of resistance that we live in moving against gravity. I reach for this cup, I have to lift it against gravity. And little things that we take for granted are not something that is normal when you are in space. So all of these factors have to come together, and which is why you can't just send any old person into space. They have to be healthy. You also want them to be competent in performing tasks. And you might want to throw in a medical doctor if the crew is large enough, because something might happen to you physiologically. And then you need some engineers. You need the combination of expertise so that the collective safety of the crew is preserved. So all of this matters. And there's another book I can recommend by Mary Roach. It's called Packing for Mars, where it's all the little things you've got to keep track of. We interviewed her for Star Talk, and there's a whole section in the Star Talk book, which you didn't bring today.
I went through it, but it was too heavy to bring.
Too heavy.
Too heavy to bring. Too much gravity.
I'm sorry. The universe has some weight. All right. We'll do this in 0G next time. Then you'll have no excuse. They can just toss the book and it'll float into your lap. So yeah, great question. Thanks.
And Mary Roach has been on this program. You can go to booktv.org. You can watch the 3 hours with author Mary Roach as well. Well, Bernie in Howard Beach, New York, you have been very patient. You are on with Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to listen to Mr. Tyson. I have a couple of questions. First, does the Big Bang violate the conservation of energy? Could it be that we're going to have a big crunch, followed by another Big Bang, followed by another big crunch, ad infinitum? And I'd love to see you run for Congress. Senator Tyson sounds really good to me. Thank you.
Hey, Bernie, why have you thought about this Big Bang? Do you work in some kind of scientific field or just an interest?
I took some physics while I was in school, and the Big Bang especially is interesting because it's almost a religious question. I think that it's still possible that you can make a case for the universe to have been here all the time, forever. But originally there was something like a steady state theory, which was abolished by the Big Bang. But it doesn't seem to preclude the idea that the universe was always here. And if the universe was always here, well, then we don't need a creator, do we? Thank you.
That's Bernie in Howard Beach, New York.
Okay, I think I have mental record of each one of those in sequence. So a couple of things. First, all evidence we have ever obtained in the history of this exercise, since the beginnings of cosmology, which basically came to us with Einstein and Edwin Hubble and others that gave supportive data for it. And it includes a Belgian priest, even by the name of Georges Lemaitre, who is generally considered the father, literal and figurative, father of the Big Bang itself. He wrote down the equations using Einstein's new theory of gravity to show that we would have a beginning in the past. So all data we have ever obtained is unequivocal in its conclusion that we are on a one-way expansion trip. One way. So
no crunch.
No crunch. No slow down, stop, and then recollapse. Not that a recollapse is prohibited by Einsteinian gravity or by any other sense of what the universe could do. We happen to be in a universe where that is not the case. So that's just simple. Now, given that it's only a one-way trip, that means we had a beginning, and the entire Big Bang description takes us from the beginning into the unlimited future. So you might then ask, and I'm putting these words in the questioner's mouth, but it gets to his other question, what was around before the beginning? Well, we don't have data for that. So we don't know, but we've got top people working on it. And one of the ideas, which actually comes naturally out of the extensions of Einstein's gravity and the extensions of quantum physics, is that there may have been a multiverse. And a multiverse would then pre-exist our universe. We're just a bubble that came out of it among possibly infinite other bubbles. So these are other universes with slightly different laws of physics manifest within them. And so to imagine that the universe was always there, not our universe, because we had a beginning, but maybe the multiverse was always there. I mean, that's possible. Or maybe the multiverse had a beginning. Maybe the multiverse is one expression of what a metaverse creates. I mean, if there's a metaverse that each has bubbles of multiverses, and each multiverse creates universes, is there anything to prevent that in principle? No. And that philosophical trajectory is not fundamentally different from thinking Earth is it. Oh, no, we're one of 8 planets. Get over it. Then, so that's a demotion. Then we say, well, how about the sun? Sun, of course. No, the sun is just one of 100 billion other suns in the Milky Way. The Milky Way, of course. No, it's one of 100 billion other galaxies. So we have good precedent for recognizing that the universe is really bad at making things in ones. And that may be true even for the universe itself, that there could simply be multiple universes. And I think that may have been 2 out of 3 of his questions. You were keeping notes here.
There was, he asked, and you talk about this in several of your books and your talks, is there a religious aspect to the Big Bang Theory? And then have you ever considered running for office?
The thing is, when you use the word religion, it comes with certain expectations of what it means. And here in the West, but most places of the world, when you say religion, it involves a document of some kind, a holy book that prescribes what you should believe, even in the absence of evidence. And it then tells you about what conduct you should have in the fact of that belief system. Okay. In science, you can put forth an idea that doesn't yet have evidence, but everybody's looking for evidence. And if we cannot generate evidence for it, then it would just simply be discarded or just put on a shelf. So evidence matters in this. So if you want to call it a religion with evidence, okay, that's just a very fresh usage of the word religion in your vocabulary. So I don't debate words with people. I don't value time invested in debating definitions. Just tell me how you're using the word, and I'll tell you whether what it is agrees with it. If you're using the word religion in a way that allows evidence to define what it is people think, say, and do, then fine. It's all religion, because that's what science does. It finds evidence that defines and discovers the truth of the world. That's just not simply how anybody else in the world is using the word religion. They're using it to refer to some kind of spiritual elements that require faith in something being true rather than evidence for something being true.
Political office.
Oh, I was once asked by the New York Times. There was some impasse, several impasses ago in Congress, and they just thought they would have fun and ask people who are definitely not politicians, what solutions do they have for getting things through Congress and fixing things? And I think the way they asked it was, if you were president, what would you do? What solutions do you have? So I wrote back, if I were president, I wouldn't be president. You can find it, it's on my website. You say, if I were president. You just Google that and my name Tyson. It'll take you to the might take you to the New York Times part, but I duplicated it in my website because they cut out a paragraph that there was not enough space. So the full response to that question is there. And it comes down to the expectation that if you run for office, you somehow can change everything. And I'm not convinced of that. So I'm a little contrarian here. In fact, my views are the literal opposite of what a lobbyist does. A lobbyist goes straight to the politician to influence the politician in ways that serve the interest of the lobbyists and who they represent. For me, any elected official represents people who put them into office. So as an educator, what matters is not so much who the official is. What matters is what is the state of enlightenment of who's doing the voting. Because if people, for example, all knew, recognized, and valued what science is and how and why it works, they would never even dream of voting for someone who doesn't know that, because that person would then not represent their full interests. So I would rather educate an electorate so they can put people in office who can make scientifically informed decisions about everything they do, rather than just install myself into office and lead people who don't yet have this knowledge or insight. That's not what. And 88, I think I did the math right on this, 88% of Congress stands for re-election every 2 years. So you can convince one congressman or another, but then you got to start all over again. You educate the electorate, we're good. I go to the Bahamas, elect people who will take this country into the future rather than back into the cave.
Next call for Neil deGrasse Tyson comes from David in East Hampton, Massachusetts. Good afternoon, David.
Hi. Another family member of mine, I was telling him that you were on TV and suggesting he might want to watch, and he told me something that he heard. I don't know how accurate this is or what the story is, but basically he said something about something called an M drive that supposedly can drive a spaceship quickly. And I'm just wondering, is an M drive a real thing? And if so, what is it and how does it work? And also, I'd be interested to hear about other possible drives for spaceships for long-distance travel, like to Mars or even further.
Neil
Yeah,
deGrasse
that's a great question. Let me just give some backstory. So right now, our rocket ships we're still using just what we call chemical energy. So you have some molecule, which when you break it apart, it releases energy. So in chemistry, we say it's exothermic, as opposed to endothermic, where the reaction absorbs energy. And by the way, we experience this if you ever see cold packs that you can buy in a drugstore, where you sort of squeeze it and then the thing just gets cold. Well, that's an endothermic reaction. It's sucking energy out from its environment. And then you have heat packs where the opposite happens. So you can get very clever with your chemistry and make this happen. Well, rocket engines are endothermic. So you squeeze the rocket and then... no. So it's highly exothermic, what a rocket engine does. So, but we've had chemical fuel since Robert Goddard, back in when his experiments, early 1920s or so. So very little has improved in our capacity to propel ourselves through space since, for 100 years almost now. So there's been some talk about other kinds of drives. One of them is a solar sail, where you can use propulsion from sunlight, that you open up a huge sail relative to the size of your craft so that you get maximal sort of pressure from sunlight, and that can accelerate you for free. And with the way you'd move around is you would tack, just the way you would a sailboat. You would tack into the wind or away from the wind, but here the wind is sunlight that you're doing this with. And then you can navigate the solar system. It's a little slower, but maybe you would ship cargo that way and then send people faster. And so the future of space exploration need not be limited to chemical energy. There are other drives. There's a plasma drive, where you have very hot gas and you let very high-speed particles come out, because the hotter a gas is, the faster the particles move, and you let them come out. And that is a very low impulse propulsion, but it's very high. So no, you're not going to sort of accelerate very much when one particle comes out, but this accumulates, and you can ultimately accelerate to very high speeds doing so. Now, so here's the problem with this and the M drive and all of these frontier means of propulsion. Yeah, you can go real fast with them. Instead of taking 9 months to get to Mars, you'll take a month. Okay, perhaps. If you want to go to visit Saturn, instead of taking 20 years, you'll take 2 years. But even if you got to the speed of light, near the speed of light, because you're not going to reach the speed of light, near the speed of light, if you want to cross the galaxy, we'll watch you do this. By our time reckoning, it'll take you 100,000 years to cross the galaxy at the speed of light. So the answer here, by the way, you will age much more slowly. So you'll get there without much time having elapsed. But we who sent you will see you take 100,000 of our years to do that. And so this is not a realistic, you come back, we would have all long forgotten about you. That's if civilization is still here. So none of these drives solve the interstellar travel problem relative to a human lifespan. Yeah, if we lived 1 million years as individuals, sure, who cares if it takes 1,000 years to get somewhere? That's 1/1000th of your life. Sure, if it's a really interesting place worth going to. So what we really need is wormholes. Wormholes. Just, you open a door here, and on the other side of the door, on the back side, you're in another part of the galaxy. By the way, viewers of this program probably read more books than see movies, but there's a movie called Monsters, Inc. It's an animated kids film. There's a lot of good adult humor in it too, but so these are monsters that work at a factory. These are monsters whose sole job in life is to scare little children. Because, of course, why else be a monster? So they work in this factory, and this factory makes doors. Doors. And they have the door, and there's nothing on, it's just a door. They open the door and go through it. And it is the door of a child's closet in the kid's bedroom. And so they emerge from the kid's closet to then scare the child. And then they go back through the door, and they're back at the factory. That's a wormhole. They didn't say that in the movie, but that's a wormhole. That's how a wormhole would work.
Would work.
Would work, yes. And I tried to be clever one time. I was in Charlotte Airport. I had to go from a big plane to a little plane. And I swear, I walked 5 miles. In the air, it's probably like just a mile, but it felt impossibly long. And so I tweeted, try to be clever, and I say, I can't wait till we have wormholes, and that way all gates can just be adjacent to one another. Gate 400 is just the other side of the door of gate number 1. Someone tweeted back, Dr. Tyson, if we have wormholes, then you won't need airports. So I said, busted. You got it. So yeah, that's so.
Not proven.
What?
Wormholes.
It works on paper, yeah, but we don't know how to make one or keep one open because they'll have a tendency to want to collapse. Yeah, it works in science fiction. That's the best place we can invoke a wormhole. But until then, we're going to be pretty much earthbound.
If we left right now, it would take us 9 months to get to Mars?
No, you can't leave right now. You have to leave when Mars and Earth are properly aligned. So just to remind people, if you see Mars in the sky and you start traveling to it, you have to travel to where Mars will be when you get there. So it's a matching of trajectories that matters here. And so what we call the minimum energy trajectory. So it's one where you burn your engines and then you shut them off, then you coast to Mars until Mars pulls you into its gravitational influence, and then you fall towards Mars. That takes about 9 months. But if you run your engines the whole time, which we can't do yet because we don't know how, because we don't have enough fuel, if we had filling stations along the way, you could do this. You fill up, burn your engines, and then you're accelerating to Mars. By the way, that will give you gravity, artificial gravity inside the ship, if the ship is accelerating. And then, but to slow down, you have to turn the ship around and then accelerate to slow down. But anyhow, if you do that, you can get to Mars in weeks, a few weeks. But it'll take a boatload of fuel to do that. But if fuel is cheap, then why not? You just need filling stations.
Lewis, San Mateo, California. You're on Book TV with Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Hi, yes, I'm in the Bay Area. There's a show with Deepak Chopra right now, but I'm choosing Mr. Tyson instead. I had a question about
okay, thank you.
Einstein, but I think I want to ask about human potential instead, or actually the thwarting of, let's say, the knowledge from political forces. Like, for instance, right now there's, I think, a woman astrophysicist in Hawaii who they know exactly what they want to look for, and they want to build a telescope there, the largest one in the world, on the biggest mountain. It would be perfect except for some Native Hawaiians who consider it sacred, so can't do it. And so I guess they'll have to build it in the Canary Islands or something. I was just thinking, another example would be in terms of particle physics. There was supposed to be a super collider built in Texas in the late 80s and early 90s, which would dwarf the one that's in Europe right now, the one that's the largest one in the world. And because of the Texas Republicans saying that we can't build it and pay for it, they can pay for wars, but they can't pay for science. So I was just wondering, because it seems to me like at this point we probably would have figured out dark matter by now, maybe be on our way to understanding dark energy. Even factoring
Hey, Lewis, you've covered a lot of topics here, and we'll get a response in a second. Do you work in science in any way?
No, I wish. I'm unemployed, but I'm actually on my last leg. We need UBI, Universal Basic Income, but I just try to get some books from the library from like Sean Carroll or Carl Ravelli or some books, but it's hard to concentrate.
All right, Lewis, thank you very much. Dr. Tyson, anything you'd like to say to him?
Yeah, thanks for those questions. And I think books have always been the great portal to other places and other ways of thinking. And so happy to hear that you are sort of in that whatever is your life's trajectory in this moment, books are giving you other things to think about and look. And Sean Carroll writes great physics books. There are two Sean Carrolls, by the way. I think there's a science writer, biologist, and then there's a physicist. I assume you meant the physicist when he mentioned Sean Carroll. but he might have meant the other one. But either one is good. On Mauna Kea in Hawaii is the most perfect spot on Earth's surface to have a telescope. It is at 14,000 feet above all moisture that could interfere with your view between you and the universe. Airflow from the ocean across the mountain is what we call laminar instead of turbulent, so that the images that you get through the telescopes are sharp rather than blurry. So in recent years, there's been resistance to adding more telescopes to the mountaintop, and resistance that's come about from native Hawaiians who value the mountain as a sacred place. And so if we're in a culture that respects cultures as much, or if not more than science, then you will get occasions where you want to build something technological that conflicts with a religious or cultural or spiritual or sociological value, and so you don't, and then you build it somewhere else. This happens. So these are choices a country makes. What was manifest here is that if there's a telescope that was going to be in Hawaii and is now in the Canary Islands, which is Spain, and we were going to have a particle accelerator, but then the next particle accelerator to do what ours was going to do, because it got its budget zeroed, is now in Switzerland, it simply means we will lose the leadership in those areas and others to come as long as that continues. That's just the reality of this. And one of the many interesting things about science is that science is not a national thing. In fact, it's not anybody's national thing. These are objective truths being explored in the objective universe. So if the United States doesn't do it, that doesn't mean no one else will. Other nations will rise up. For example, the largest telescope in the world today, which focuses on radio waves, it used to be the Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico, largest dish in the world. In fact, many movie scenes are filmed there, including several important ones from Carl Sagan's film Contact. Now the largest radio telescope in the world is in China. So that if aliens were sending signals to us and we had to find it out of the din of cosmic radio noise, the Chinese will be the first to communicate with aliens, not the Americans. And so this will just continue. It's one of the signs that the United States is sort of fading on the world technological stage. There are many, but these are part of them. If you do not think science matters, then in the future you will be buying products innovated elsewhere. And your economic health and stability, you can still be a functioning country, but you're not going to be leading the world in anything that will be shaping tomorrow's civilization.
Steve, Anaheim, California, please go ahead. Steve, Anaheim, one more time. All right, I apologize, Dr. Tyson. Mm-hmm. Steve is not there, but you brought up Carl Sagan. What was your relationship with him? How'd you get to know him?
It wasn't, I think the press occasionally overstates what the relationship was. I met him when I was 17, just an anonymous high school kid. But what was remarkable about that was that he was already famous, though he had not yet done Cosmos. But he was already famous. He had been on Johnny Carson, The Tonight Show, multiple times. Cover stories in Parade magazine. He was already well known, and I'd applied to Cornell where he was on the faculty, and unknown to me, the admissions office sent my application to him to get his comment and reaction. My application was dripping with the universe at the time, because I'd known since age 9 that this is what I wanted to do. He then sent me a personal letter inviting me to tour the campus and visit the lab so that I can make an informed decision of where I would attend. And I said yes. So I got on the bus, went from New York City up to Ithaca, New York. This was in December, in the winter. It was cold, and he indeed met me outside the building, took me to the lab, showed me the lab, reached behind him. I never forget this. Didn't even have to look. Grabbed a book off the shelf. It was one of his books, and signed it to me. I just thought, wow, that's badass. You don't even have to look. And wherever your hand lands, that's a book that you've written. And I still have that book. It was his book, The Cosmic Connection. And it says, to Neil, future astronomer, Carl. And so then at the end of the day, he drives me back to the bus station. It begins to snow, not an uncommon thing in Ithaca, New York, I would later learn. And then he says, here's my home phone. If the bus can't get through, just call. You can spend the night with my family. And I'm thinking, I'm just like nobody from nowhere. And I remember distinctly thinking, if I'm ever remotely as famous as Carl Sagan, then I will have a duty and obligation to treat students with this level of kindness and generosity that he had exhibited with me. And I didn't ultimately attend Cornell, but that was an indelible moment in terms of how to behave in the presence of others who have ambitions on tracks that you have laid or tracks that you are on. So thereafter, I attended one of his talks. He gave a couple of public talks. He blurbed my second book. I don't know if you have it here. No, you don't. You don't have it here. No.
Universe Down to Earth, it's called.
Yeah,
it came out in 1994.
So I wrote a letter to him and said, I don't know if you remember me. I was the kid who did this, but even if not, this is it was my second book. And so he read it, wrote a blurb, and said, on page 17, I think you have a typo. It's this and not that. So that's how you knew he actually did go through the whole book. But that was it until his widow, Anne Druyan, who was one of the co-authors of the original Cosmos, a woman with huge talent in her own right, deeply insightful. In fact, for me, I would say she's one of the most enlightened people I've ever met. Just in terms of, you ask her a question and she'll say something. Hey, I never thought of, hey, that's, yeah, keep talking. I'll just sit here and listen. You just talk for the next hour. And when you meet someone like that, it's a special thing. And so I was invited by the estate, basically, to host the follow-on Cosmos to the original. And she continued to co-author that with a colleague of mine, Steve Soder, who also co-authored the original Cosmos with Carl. So the two of them re-teamed up for this project. And but other than that, I mean, I had a few encounters with Carl, maybe 5. But we weren't like beer drinking buddies and hung out at each other's houses. It wasn't that relationship. And nor was it a mentorship, which you would presume you get that with persistent one-on-one exchanges. It was more, let me pose a different question. Do you actually have to be close to someone for them to serve as a mentor? And I don't think you do. You just have to be aware of the examples that they set and what place they occupy in society. And if you're observant, and if they are successful at that, then just simply being aware, and if you're receptive to it, simply being aware and receptive can, in its own way, have him serve as a mentor. So I can think of him as a mentor, but if you use the word, it gives a different impression than what people would be expecting of the word.
How many day jobs do you have right now?
No, I claim only one day job. Everything else is a night job. So I'm director of New York City's Hayden Planetarium. There's another Hayden Planetarium in Boston, by the way, which is sort of buried within the Boston Museum of Science. So it doesn't have its own sort of storefront.
Same Hayden?
It's the same Hayden money, the Hayden Foundation. We were the 5th planetarium in the United States. Not as famous as Hayden became in New York, it was the 5th planetarium. After Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, Chicago was the first. And there's another one I keep forgetting in there, and then came us. But all that happened very quickly, like within 10 years or so, back in the 1920s and 30s. Between 1930 and 1935, 5 planetariums went up. And so So Hayden was alive when we gave us the money, but then the foundation, he was a financier, so the foundation existed, and then they're still active today. They give monies to programs that help kids after school boost their sort of interest in what it is to learn. So I'm director of the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History. But also, I enjoy writing, and a perfect day for me is when the phone doesn't ring, there's nothing in my inbox, and I can just write. I also want to get back to the lab, not something I've been in much lately, the proverbial lab. So for me, it would be at the computer, reducing data from telescopes, theorizing things that can be tested, just being a full-up scientist again. I greatly miss that. It's now a very small fraction of the time I invest in a week. But I have a possibly delusional ambition that I'm visible enough so that other people want to do exactly what I do, and then they rise up, and then all the media starts focusing on them, and then I can sort of back away and unnoticed. And then I go to the Bahamas and recover, and then I sneak into the lab, and no one even knows I'm missing. I'm just gone. And all these other people on the landscape of science communication. That's my ideal future. And then you'll never see me again. That's, however delusional that plan is, I think about that all the time. So there's that. I also, when I'm invited, I give public talks, although I can't honor all invitations. I get about 200 a month. That's obviously an impossible number. So
how many do you
severe triage whittles that down between 0 and 4. And ideally, we snip them together so that it's a rapid succession. Then I go back home. So there's that. There's the universe flinches. I get a call from the press. So I'm a servant of the public's appetite for knowledge of the universe and science. So, and I live in New York City, is where we are right now. Which is a major news gathering center. We have, CNN, although I think the real headquarters are in Atlanta. They got a huge building here in New York, ABC, CBS, NBC.
All very close to the Hayden Planetarium.
Yeah, it's just a car ride, and also some of the comedic talk shows, the Daily Show, and they're all here as well. So there are people who fly in and stay overnight to appear on those shows. And I'm home for dinner, I say, honey, I'll be home in 20 minutes. We finish taping, and so that's a lot of time and effort, more than you might think, because you might see me on for the 5 minutes in an evening news interview, for example. But there's the pre-call, and you got to get there an hour early, and then you got to go into makeup, and I got to change and look presentable, and then so it takes out, it's like bites out of the day. So what I don't have that many other people might have are long stretches of hours where nothing comes in. And there's a different kind of thinking, a different kind of creativity that will manifest when you have long stretches where you're not tugged in 20 different directions. There's an old saying, which I agree entirely. It goes, if you want to be more creative, become less productive. And how do we define productivity? I did 50 emails today, and I cooked the dinner, and I went shopping, and I did this. Look how productive I am. Yeah, but did you create anything? Did you have a new idea? Did you invent something? Have you reflected on reality? There's a whole other thing that the human brain does when given the opportunity. So I try to carve swaths of time in the week for just that purpose.
Who is Honey? If you're saying, honey, I'll be home for dinner.
Oh, I don't actually say honey, but that's the trope. So my wife, Alice, yes, we both like. We're both foodies, I would say. Not crazy foodies, but we're in the door, in the front door, but not in the middle. Maybe we care about our ingredients and how the food tastes. And one of my great regrets is when we finally perfect a dish. It means we can no longer order it at a restaurant because we make it better than they do. And going to a restaurant is then no longer special. And so I make if I say so myself, I make a really excellent rack of lamb that I can no longer order at a restaurant because it's not as good as mine. And so that takes that off the list. And my roast chicken is pretty good too. So I don't order chicken in restaurants anymore. Unless it's some very fancy dish where the chicken is just incidental to how fancy it is. And then you see the artisanry of the chef. So we will go to a restaurant that's like slightly more expensive than it should be, just to see if something rises up in the menu that we observe. So yes, we care about food and wine, and we also go to the theater often. I love a good corny musical, a good dramatic play, and we have the luxury to be able to do that as residents of New York City as well, of course.
And she's a PhD in math.
Yeah, she has a PhD in mathematical physics, actually.
Richard, Springdale, Arkansas, you have been very patient. You are on with astrophysicist and author Neil deGrasse Tyson on Book TV.
Hello. Gosh, it's a pleasure to speak with you, sir. My question is, in around the 4th century BC, there was a Greek named Hipparchus. He discovered something called precession. Now, for all those climate alarmists out there, and I don't want to be political, I want to be scientific, would you please explain precession and the effect it has on this planet?
Sure. So Hipparchus, thank you for the question. Hipparchus was brilliant. I mean, I just imagine what he'd be discovering today if he sort of woke up in the 21st century world, and you show him all these tools we have of science, and of course he had hardly any tools. He had just a brilliant brain of his, and so precession is we have our Earth. And, well, there are multiple precessions. Anything that rotates or revolves will generally precess. And precession is if you have like sort of an elliptical orbit, an oval orbit around the sun, and here's the planet sort of repeating that. Over time, the shape of that oval will turn, even though the planet is continually orbiting. The shape will move around the center object that it's turning. So that would be the precession of your orbit. Earth spins on our axis, and we point off in one direction, the direction where the North Pole is, where Polaris is, the North Star. However, we're not fixed in space doing that. We actually wobble, and we execute one full wobble in 26,000 years. Okay? So, for example, 13,000 years from now, our axis will not be pointing towards the North Star. It'll be pointing towards a different object over here, if there even happens to be one. So, this is the precession of Earth's rotation. And the way this manifests is on the night sky, we call it what's called the precession of the equinoxes. So, Earth's equator projected onto the sky actually drifts across the constellations over 26,000 years. So what this means is the first point of Aries, as an astrologer will tell you, which says the sun is entering the constellation Aries on March 21st. That is the declaration of the first point of Aries. And beginning March 21st, if you're born in the next 30 days, the astrologer will say you are Aries, because the sun is in front of the stars of that constellation. In the day, people didn't know about distance, so they said the sun was moving through the constellation. But of course, the sun is right in front of us, plus the sun is not really moving at all. It's us going around. But they didn't know this back when they laid all this out, okay? Asserting that the universe is controlling your life. So this first point of Aries actually drifts. And it's been about 2,000 years since this was laid out, and the first point of Aries was identified. And so if you now look at maps and ask, what is the sun doing when it's March 21st? It is not entering Aries. It is an entire constellation shifted from that. Because 2,000 years is about 1/12 of 26,000 years, a little less. It's a whole constellation off. So when you go to your horoscope, if you do this, and you say, I'm a Libra, or I'm a Scorpio, or I'm a this, and it tells you what you should be thinking or doing, the name of your astrological sign actually has no correspondence to what's going on in today's sky. It is a holdover from what people used to think 2,000 years ago. And this is a free country. Read your horoscope if you want. I'm not even going to stop you. Go right ahead. I would expect that people voting for people in charge would know that you don't put someone who thinks the universe is influencing their life in charge of other people who know that it isn't.
From your most recent book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, quote, some of the water you just drank passed through the kidneys of Socrates, Genghis Khan, and Joan of Arc.
Is that a question?
If you could expound on that maybe a little bit.
An explanation. I'm trying to, in that part of the book, I tried to make sure in Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, it's not a very big book, but there's a lot in there. And I wanted to make sure every 10 pages or so, there was something there that would just blow your mind. That was be cosmically true, but you got to go, what? In fact, I have to reread that just to fully absorb the significance of it. So here's the point. In this cup of water, there's water in here. There's water in here. There are more water molecules in this cup of water than there are cups of water in all the world's oceans. That's how small molecules are. So what that means is if I take this and toss it out, there's enough molecules in what I tossed to enter every other possible cup of water anyone draws from the world's water supply. There's enough to scatter to every possible cup of water in the world. So if I drink this, it comes back out of my body in some way or another, any one of a half dozen ways. So that re-enters the environment, goes to clouds, it goes to the streams, goes to the oceans, and given enough time, it mixes completely. So, Socrates drank a glass of water. It is a certainty, it's essentially a certainty, that some molecules that passed through his kidney were in that glass that you just drank. And this is a statement of the connectivity of life and the communality of our existence with one another, the interdependence of what it is we do and how it is we behave. And it's not only that, by the same reasoning, there are more molecules of air in every breath you draw than there are breaths of air in all the Earth's atmosphere. So by the same calculation, every breath you take contains molecules that pass through the lungs, molecules of nitrogen, not the oxygen because that mixes back with the trees, but certainly the nitrogen. Most of the nitrogen, because there's a nitrogen cycle as well. But molecules which scatter quickly and easily throughout the atmosphere, some of those molecules pass through the lungs of whatever is your favorite historical character, Jesus. It would have passed through their lungs. And so you want to think of us as separate and distinct from one another or not connected to the world, but we are. And for me, what I think of as fascinating ways.
Is there something that you've studied or learned that you just can't get your arms around yet?
Oh, tons.
that you just can't quite accept?
Yeah, but there's some things that I never expect to get my arms around, either because they're too big or they're too weird. And often when you say, I got my arms around this, it implies that, oh, now that makes sense. But as I lead off the book, commenting that the universe is under no obligation to make sense to any of us, I don't have as a requirement that I can one day put my arms around it. I can just recognize that it's there and accept it even if it just sounds completely weird. And so what you accept it because the evidence shows that it's true, not because you have faith or because you want it to be true or because you need it to be true. It's because observation and experiment, verified observation and experiment, has demonstrated the truth in that statement.
Dr. Tyson, you tweet, @NeilTyson is your Twitter handle, several million followers. Here is a tweet you sent out on March 11th, 2016. I occasionally wonder whether the entire universe is nothing more than a snow globe on the living room mantle of an alien. Was that a late night tweet or something?
Yeah, I occasionally wonder that. That's all. The universe is all we know. It's our entire existence. And look at what we do to, I don't know if this is still a thing to do, when you have ant farms. You ever have an ant farm and there's a little bit of sand here and there's a vessel and there are little tubes. They're the ants just doing their thing. And I don't know if they're happy or sad or they're thinking about it, but do they know they're in an ant farm? Do they have self-awareness? Do they have any idea? Do bees know that you're about to steal all of their honey? They have a world where they are pollinating plants and coming back and making honey. Do they have any idea that we created that world for them when it's a bee farm? Any idea at all? So we get to do this because we are smarter than they are, so we can outsmart them and create an environment in which we think they're happy. And therefore they do what it is they want. So we outsmart our pets, okay? We feed them and continue to feed them. That keeps them there, and we provide for them. But we do things that, because we're smarter than they are, they don't know the difference, right? So could it be that everything we know and love in this world is just for the entertainment of an alien? Is that so hard a thought to imagine? I know you don't want to think that. We want to think we have free will. We want to think that we're in charge. But are we? So yes, I don't remember what time of day. I think tweets are date stamped and time stamped, but I don't remember when I might have posted that.
Well, this is an email from Michael Nutzel in Gainesville, Florida. Got a question for Neil Tyson. Are we alone? Why are there any evidence about UFOs? Why is how he phrased it. So, is there any evidence about UFOs? Why is there?
So it sounds like, are we alone on Earth rather than are we alone in the universe? We're not likely alone in the universe. If you look at how common the ingredients of life is how common it is, hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and carbon. We're made of this stuff. That's the foundations of organic chemistry, carbon-based life. This stuff is everywhere we look in the universe. And so whatever happened on Earth, it's not likely to be rare or unique, because carbon chemistry, on which life is based, is the most fertile kind of chemistry there is. And carbon is abundant across the universe. So if there's life somewhere else, it's probably based on carbon. It's a fascinating bias, but it's not an unjustified bias. And so, the universe has been around 14 billion years, plenty of time to evolve all manner of creatures out there, particularly microorganisms. We have no reason to not think of microorganisms as aliens. They don't have to have built a ship. There's just alien life on another planet. Now, have we been visited? That's a different question than whether we assert that there's life elsewhere in the universe. By the way, we have people looking for life in the universe, as well as not only any kind of life, but intelligent life. And we try to be clever about how we conduct those experiments. On Earth, what the UFO community puts forth as evidence is weak on a level that in any scientific circle would be kicked out of the lab room. You have things like eyewitness testimony. I'm sorry, this is not working, okay? No, I don't. If you walk into a conference and say, this is true because I saw it, you'll get laughed off. We're not saying you didn't see it. We're simply saying that you cannot present that as evidence for something that you want all. Okay? So eyewitness testimony is not something that's valued in scientific circles. I don't care what it is you're looking at. And especially if it's something that would be truly extraordinary, like visitation by aliens. I need more than your eyewitness testimony. I don't trust your eyewitness testimony if you told me the moon rose yesterday. Okay? I need better data than that. I probably would trust that because it's not extraordinary, but on that level. But as your claim gets more and more extraordinary, the less confidence I'm going to place in your data-taking system that involves your eyes and brain. It is why in science we invent methods and tools of measurement to replace our senses, because we know how feeble they are, how non-representational they are of reality. Psychologists have known this ever since there's been psychology. In science, we've known it ever since we've seen the effects of this influence data. Okay, so now you take a picture of something that you don't understand. That's better than eyes. All right, now you have pictures or video. That's better, okay? So what is this? Well, it's unidentified. Right, that's what the U stands for. Unidentified. We don't know what it is. It's a mystery. Okay? Good. What do you want me to do about it? Okay, so my point here is, if you've seen a UFO, the U, just remind yourself what the U stands for. Unidentified. Once you say, I just saw a UFO, there really should just be a period at the end of that sentence. But what typically happens is people keep talking and they say, I don't know what it is, therefore it must have been an intelligent alien visiting from outer space coming to Earth to observe us. But wait a minute, you just said you didn't know what it is because it was unidentified. Now you're telling me what it must be? The fact that you admitted that you did not know what you were looking at precludes all the rest of this sentence that just came out of your mouth. Okay, I'm not going to stop you from trying to find the aliens. I'd love to meet some aliens. But I have such low confidence in your claims that they're aliens that I will not be investing any of my time. But I'm glad you are. Go right ahead. And the day you find an alien, I need something better than your video camera showing that it's unidentified, and I need something better than your eyewitness testimony. Ideally, in fact, bring the alien. All right? You're good to go. I'm not going to stop you from doing that. A. B, everybody has a video camera today. Everybody. Where are the flooded YouTube postings of people's experiences inside of flying saucers, shaking hands with the aliens? Where is that? We have video of extremely rare phenomenon now because everybody has a video camera. We have video of buses tumbling in tornadoes. There was a day where you wouldn't say, oh my gosh, that bus is about to tumble. Let me go home and get my shoulder-mounted video camera so I can film this. No, you're getting your ass out of there when you see this happen. Everybody has a video camera, so we have rare surveillance footage of things, okay? If you've been abducted and you had an encounter with an alien, give me some good video of it. And get some other people to get video of it too. Then we're good. I got it. But as long as it's unidentified to you, have I made myself clear enough in this? And by the way, I have very high experience looking at the night sky and the day sky, okay? And knowing what can happen in the night sky and in the day sky. I have seen things which without this extra background that I have, I would have easily reported as a UFO to the police department. I know this. But because I've studied phenomenon of the sky, I could identify it. There are clouds that build above mountaintops that take circular form, that are very high altitude. If the mountain is high, the cloud is even higher. They're called orographic clouds. And some are called lenticular clouds. But these clouds are very high up. They can have perfectly cylindrical shape. Now watch what happens. The sun sets. You're at the bottom of the mountain. The sun sets for you. It hasn't yet set for those high altitudes because they can see beyond your horizon. So the sun is still there for them. It gets dark for you, and the cloud is lit by sunset colors. Orange, red, and it's vibrant, and it's circular, and it looks for all the world like the mothership just came and docked over the mountaintop. If you are susceptible to wanting this to be true, then that for all the world is the mothership. Whereas to me, it's a cloud that forms naturally over mountaintops when hot air goes up and cools abruptly and water condenses out of it. So, and then there are people who say, this is a good eyewitness. This person is a brigadier general. Is the person who's the eyewitness human? That's all that matters. You're no less susceptible, no more susceptible, no less susceptible than anybody else. I don't care what your title is. I don't care if you're a military pilot. It doesn't matter. I don't care. You're human. You got to do better than that. Oh, and if you get abducted, I tell this to people. If you get abducted and they're poking your gonads, as of course all aliens do, we've been told, tell the alien, hey, look over there, and then snatch something off the shelf. Okay? Just do that, okay? And then go back to the. Then when they let you out, you pull it. You say, "Look what I've stolen from the alien spacecraft, an alien coaster or an ashtray." We can then take this to the lab and see if it is of alien manufacture. Okay? And if the alien came here on a spaceship from across the gaps of space, anything you pull off the shelf is going to be interesting. Still waiting for that to happen.
Every guest we have on In Depth, we ask, who are they reading? What are some of their career influences? Things like this. These are the answers that we got from Neil deGrasse Tyson.
This is Henrietta Leavitt, who was looking at, we're going to get to these magnificent images, who was looking at images taken from South America because the whole sky had to be covered. There was a second observatory built in Peru to photograph the stars of the southern hemisphere. And she was looking at images of the Magellanic Clouds, and she discovered a couple thousand variable stars and made a fundamental discovery about the pattern of variation, that the stars that took the longest time to go through their cycles tended to be the brightest stars. And she figured all of the stars she was looking at were roughly the same distance away. So ones that looked brighter really were brighter. And that observation led to the first usable yardstick for measuring what we would call now galactic distances and intergalactic distances in space. And her work enabled the size of the Milky Way to be determined. I may be getting ahead of the slides here,
no, that's
but
fine.
also to figure
place.
out that the Milky Way was not the only galaxy in the universe, that the universe, in fact, consisted of multiple galaxies.
So it would be fair to say that at that time they weren't sure if the universe was maybe just a few 100,000 light years across, and maybe that was it.
That was it.
Or even the shape of the universe. Like this led to us looking at, what geometry of globular clusters and spiral galaxies, and then to place ourselves within that geometry.
You can watch this and other programs online at booktv.org.
Here's a look at some books being published this week. Former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice examines global struggles for independence in democracy. Pulitzer Prize-winning author David Garrow explores the pre-presidential life of Barack Obama in Rising Star. Pat Buchanan, former speechwriter and senior advisor to President Richard Nixon, offers an inside look at the Nixon administration in Nixon's White House wars. Journalists Thomas Oliphant and Curtis Wilkie recall John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign in The Road to Camelot. Also being published this week, University of Pittsburgh British history professor Holger Hook looks at the war crimes committed by the British and Continental armies during the Revolutionary War in Scars of Independence. Eva Dillon reports on her father's career as an American intelligence officer and his relationship with the CIA's top Soviet double agent in Spies in the Family. Sally Mott Freeman shares the story of two U.S. navalmen's efforts to find their youngest brother, who was listed as missing in action in the Philippines during World War II in The Jersey Brothers. And Rachel Pearson, a resident physician, offers her thoughts on the American healthcare system through her own experiences in No Apparent Distress. Look for these titles in bookstores this coming week, and watch for many of the authors in the near future on Book TV on C-SPAN 2.
Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, we asked you your favorite books, your influences, and what you're currently reading. We just showed that to our audience, but you sent us extra notes. Instead of just the titles, you gave some explanations, including On the Day You Were Born, you say is one of your favorite books by Deborah Fraser.
Well, children's books. Yeah, it's a book that if I knew how to write a children's book, it's a book that I would have written, but I don't have that talent that she did. It's a very simple and beautiful account of all the things that are going on in nature in any given day of the year, but you get to read it to a child. It's a way for a child to be exposed to all the things that nature does in this world, what Earth does as a planet in orbit around the sun, what the whale is doing in the ocean, what the Arctic terns are doing. So it's a walk through nature. That has nothing to do with the baker or the politician, or those are other things that are happening on the day you were born. But nature is, excuse me, nature is what the person is the child to whom you're reading this story is being exposed. And so I just think it's beautiful. And I get misty-eyed when I read it. It's just so beautiful. It's nature brought to life for someone who can't read yet on the day you were born.
The book you're currently reading, Science and Humanism by Erwin Schrödinger, you call it a mid-century assessment of the role and value of science in guiding the progress of civilization.
Yeah, I'd like reading through the history of how people thought, especially as it may have been influenced by the politics or culture of the time. 1950 is sort of the dawn of the Cold War, and it's obviously it's before the wall went up, but we're feeling the aftermath of the Second World War, the divide of the world's powers. And this is a scientist who was around and lived through it, made seminal contributions to quantum physics, and decided to write a little bit for the public. And that's not his first book. Well, he has several books that he's written for the public. One of them is just What is Life? And he's talking about how physics manifests in biology. And these are short books, but a friend of mine gave it to me. I saw it on his shelf. So I didn't know Schrodinger wrote this. Oh, you want to borrow it? So that happens to be right on my bookshelf at this moment.
202 is the area code if you want to participate in our conversation with Neil deGrasse Tyson this afternoon. 748-8200 if you live in the East and Central time zones. 748-8201 for those of you in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. We'll also cycle through our social media addresses so that you can contact us that way. If you can't get through on the phone lines, we've got about 50 minutes left with our guests this afternoon. And Heather in Jacksonville, Florida, you have been very patient. Please go ahead.
Hi there, good afternoon, sir. It's an honor to speak with you. I have a question about your education. I just finished my bachelor's degree. I literally earned it 2 weeks ago in communications. And I'm trying to figure out, do I pursue an advanced degree? Thank you. I'm trying to figure out if I should pursue an advanced degree or should I go back and get a 4-year degree because I actually like engineering physics. So how did you figure out if you wanted to pursue an advanced degree, and how in the world did you end up paying for it? And yes, I am taking notes.
Oh, okay. Wow. So those are great questions. So advanced degrees, especially in academic subjects, as opposed to medical, doctor, law school, that sort of thing. When I think of academic subjects, I think you have to really, really love the subject, right? Whereas in medical school, you don't have to love medical school to know that at the end you want to be a medical doctor because you have friends who are medical doctors and or an attorney. To enter academic graduate school, you have to really, really love it because you're not going to get much money. And while you're in school, and when you get out of school, you're not going to get much money. And the rewards are the act of pursuing previously undiscovered truths. In any field. Could be English literature, or history, or art, or if it's academic, and in the sciences. So, because also things will not always go as you want them. And in the sciences, for example, you could be in a lab and you design the experiment and nothing works. Well, you don't get the result you expected, and you don't get a result worth publishing. Then you have to start again, and it's 2 years of your life. If all of what I just said is a chore, if you're saying, no, I don't want to be in that situation, then no, stay away. But if in your life you have learned to love the questions themselves, without regard to whether you asking a question and designing an experiment to answer it leads to an answer, then this is that life. So and by the way, as an academic, if you get a faculty position, or in some cases you can be hired by corporations, it's a decent living. You're not going to be the wealthiest person on the block, but you'll have a car and a house and a family and all. There are no unhappy academics for the absence of money. Okay, so there's that part. You say, how do I pay for it? Well, in my field, we also worked as a teaching assistant, which participates in the teaching enterprise that the school undergoes. So that was worth a salary, not very much money. Many people have roommates, but that's a flow of money. After that, it's still not all that much money, but it's more. And if you went into debt in college, but you're doing what you love, then we're talking about the happiness of your life here. So what if you're in debt? That's a kind of contrarian view that most people have, to most people. But my point is, if you get to do what you love, and some debt becomes associated with it, then you pay down the debt. The debt takes you 10 years, so what? 15 years, so what? We all willingly walk into 30-year mortgages when we buy a house. Nope, you're going into debt. Don't buy a house. You're going into debt. No. So how do we justify it? We say, well, the real estate value will be higher at the end, so this is an investment. That's what we tell ourselves. And for a lot of the time, that's true. There are obviously important exceptions to that, especially in 2008. But all right, let's look at your education as an investment. We are now investing in your enlightenment and your future happiness. Shouldn't that be worth at least carrying some debt, such as the kind of debt you'd be carrying in a home mortgage? So I was never afraid of debt. And I was in debt from college and some in graduate school. Like I said, I got some payment in graduate school. So I didn't pay off my college debt for, when would it have been? 15 years later. And as my salary kept going up, and I'm not talking about a lot of money here, I'm just talking about going up from a student money to like regular person money, all of a sudden the debt that I'd accumulated so many years earlier looked smaller and smaller. It's because I was wielding more and more money. And so, they need $1,000. I remember paying $10 a month to start off paying that debt. And I got my first job, I could pay $50 a month. Then I could pay $100 a month. And so, yeah, I was investing in myself and my future. So that's my answer. And as they say, if you pick a subject to study that you're in love with, then you'll never be working for the rest of your life. You'll just be having fun.
Neil deGrasse Tyson's 2000 book, The Sky Is Not the Limit, essentially his autobiography in many ways.
Yeah, memoir. Yeah,
memoir. Harvard, University of Texas, and Columbia. And I think the favorite sentence in that book, let's read it for our viewers. To set one's genitals on fire seem more like the absence of a creative solution to money problems rather than a need to dance.
Was that a question?
If you want to expound on that, that would be fine. Or we could just move on. Not explain.
Yes. So in high school and college, I was very athletic. In high school, I was a captain of my school's wrestling team, and in college, I continued to wrestle. I also rode, but my first love was wrestling, and I also was a performing member of 2 different dance companies, and because I also liked not only being strong and limber, but also graceful, flexible and graceful, and dance is that, if it's nothing else. And so I just enjoyed what it could do and be for my body. And in graduate school, I continued to wrestle and row and dance when I really shouldn't have been. I mean, I should have never left the lab, but I continued this. I started graduate school in Texas where I met my wife, the woman who would be my wife. But before all of that, I had my fellow dancers, and they hear my money problems, and they said, "Oh, why don't you dance with us? After hours, we dance at this strip club for women." And I was like really buff at the time, and I could do a full split. I could do things that a stripper might do under all of those situations that they described. So I said, wow, because I was really struggling. I probably would not have struggled as much. I know I would not have struggled as much if I'd had a roommate, but I wanted to live alone. I'd spent 4 years in college with a roommate, so that increased my expenses. And so anyhow, so they invited me down just to check it out. And I saw them come out with an asbestos-lined jockstrap that had been set onto fire, had been ignited, and they were shaking their hips to the Jerry Lee Lewis's Great Balls of Fire. So in that instant, I said, maybe I should be a math tutor. And I'm embarrassed that solution did not occur to me earlier. Because of course I can tutor math. I majored in physics. We know math and physics. So and a math tutor is necessary. You need that anywhere. Everybody needs a math tutor, right? So from then on, I tutored math for some few dollars an hour, and that was fine. And it enabled me to make my ends meet.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is our guest, and Chris is calling in from Goldsboro, North Carolina. Chris, you're on Book TV.
Thank you. It was great seeing you earlier today on AM Joy as well with Dr. Tyson.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, on MSNBC.
It was great. I always try to catch moments where you're on TV.
And by the way, both of these are live. So I went from that studio, got in a car, came here, and now I'm in this studio. So.
Okay, I knew you was in New York because you had to go from one player to the other. I was just like, well, dang, he went there awfully quick.
No, actually, I have a wormhole, but don't tell anybody.
All right, fine. They say I have things too, so hey. My first question involves what I've seen on on the series on the Science Channel called "How the Universe Works." It was one of their segments dealing with black holes. My question involves a feature that they discussed that was a possibility, and it involved the speed of matter excelling faster than light within this region of the black hole because of the force of gravity. My question relates to if these conditions were met outside of a black hole, and say, for instance, it happened near a planet or a solar system, what would be the aftermath or the effects of such an event occurring?
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, so if I understand your question, you're talking about somehow accelerating mass to the speed of light or then beyond the speed of light, and what effect would that have on its environment? I think that was the question. So first of all...
Yeah, and whether that's feasible to get beyond the speed of light.
There is no known way, experimentally and theoretically, to accelerate a material body to the speed of light and beyond it. You can get close to it, but you're not reaching the speed of light. And that's just it's so, we joke that the speed of light is not just a good idea, it's the law. And it's not a matter of we haven't invented a way to do it yet, which was the case with the sound barrier, okay? Now consider that anyone who said we'll never go faster than sound, ever, well, except that the tip of a bullwhip, that crack that you hear, it's moving faster than sound. Not only that, we had guns at the time with a bullet emerged from the barrel, faster than sound. So for anyone to say, man will never go faster than sound, no. Just because you don't know how doesn't mean we never will. Okay? It is different with regard to light. This is not an engineering limit. It is a physical limit of nature. And like I said, we've never seen it. We've tried and it's never worked, and theoretically not possible. Okay. Now, that doesn't prevent something, I'm going to take the question beyond a step. That doesn't prevent something from existing faster than light. We've hypothesized about such objects. You can't pass through the speed of light, but you can exist on the other side of this. And if you do, then you move backwards through time. And we hypothesized a particle that does this, and we call it the tachyon, from the Greek root tachios, meaning fast. So a tachometer is also a word that draws from that root. So that would be really cool if tachyons existed in this world. People have proposed experiments for how to detect them, and we've never found them. So just because it's okay in the equation doesn't mean nature has to abide by that possibility. So the fun part about tachyons is, let's say that I see that you're walking down the corridor and you slip on a banana peel and fall. And I say, oh, let me prevent that because I can send him a text to warn him about the banana peel. Okay, so before he gets there, because the tachyon will go back in time and reach you. So I send a message and I say, watch out for the banana peel. And I send off the text. 10 seconds before you get to the banana peel, you get a text. And what do you do when you get a text? You reach in your pocket, you pull out your smartphone, and you start reading it. While you are reading my text that says, watch out for the banana peel, you slip on the banana peel. But you would not have slipped on it if I didn't distract you with the text that told you to look out for the banana peel. You would have just been walking down the corridor. So that's an interesting case where the act of trying to interfere with the past created the very thing you tried to interfere with. And so there's still a lot more thinking we need to do on the frontier of time travel. But that's an example of something where an event may always be happening exactly that way, and there's nothing you can do to change it, because the act of trying to change it created the event that you tried to change.
Klein Observatory tweets in, just saw on Book TV, Neil Tyson lists Agnes Clerk as an influence. She chronicled the rise of astrophysics in a remarkable set of books.
Yes. So Agnes Clerk, I have, I think, most of her books. I may just say many of her books. She wrote in the 19th century, which was a golden age of astronomical discovery. We don't think of it that way because we have much bigger telescopes today, and relativity and quantum physics, all those are 20th century discoveries. But the 19th century, if you were around at the time, you would have been celebrating how far science has come. Just keep in mind, if there's more science going on than ever before, that's a golden age for you. Never mind what happens later. In that moment, you feel like you're at the top of... I have a book, not of hers, but someone else's from 1890, that said, I wrote a book on the sun in 1895, and we've just learned so much about the sun, I had to have a new edition. It's just celebrating this little bit of 5 years of discovery. So what she did was chronicle cosmic discovery, not only historically, from the ancients to the present, but she has books. She was a popularizer of then modern astronomy. It's before astronomy became today what we think of as astrophysics. And some of my books are kind of doing just that. I have a book called The Pluto Files, chronicling the demotion of Pluto. If she were alive today, I think she would have written that book. So I was delighted to learn that there were people who cared enough about science to then learn about it and then share it with people who have an interest in science who would not otherwise be doing that work themselves. So in math, we say she's an existence proof that this is an interesting and useful thing to do. Agnes Clerk. It was probably pronounced Clark, but it's spelled C-L-E-R-K-C-K-E, yeah, Clark.
And are you familiar with Klein Observatory?
No, I'm not actually.
Okay. Your book...
By the way, if you have a dome and a telescope, you can call it an observatory. It's an observatory. So I'm delighted to know there's an observatory I don't know about. That the more the merrier. Yeah.
In 2007, you wrote the book Death by Black Hole, and you quote a gentleman named Lord Kelvin, who in 1901 said, "There is nothing new to be discovered in physics now."
Yeah, that was a boneheaded thing to say. And he had a certain arrogance to him, a sort of physicist's arrogance, where sort of in physics, there's no real understanding of chemistry without physics. And there's no real understanding of biology without chemistry. So physics, I think, is justifiably considered the anchoring subject of all the sciences. So, and that's a justifiable claim. The question is whether it gets to your ego as a physicist. And in his case, that's one of many examples where he's just kind of saying things that he really had no business saying. And 1901, within 4 years, special relativity would be discovered by Albert Einstein. 8 years after that, 10 years after that, the general theory of relativity would be discovered. 4 years after that, all of quantum physics would come down the pipe. So yeah, that's got to be the most embarrassing statement ever uttered by any scientist ever, who's otherwise a respected and famous scientist. And the Kelvin temperature scale is named after him, by the way.
The Sky is Not the Limit came out in 2000, and Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson wrote that the 20th century ended without us knowing the composition of 90% of the matter in the universe.
Yeah, so we have finer tuned numbers on that. So it's about 85% of... So let me say, it's not that we don't know what 85% of the matter is. We don't know what 85% of the gravity is. That's a strictly accurate statement. We look around the universe and we see stars and planets moving, and we add up all the gravity that should be making that happen, we get 15%. That includes everything we can think of and dream up and know of. Black holes, gas clouds, stars, moons, planets. All of this added up is 15% of what is driving the gravity of the universe. Add to that, there's something that we call dark energy, which is responsible for the acceleration of the universe, and the number is even higher. So I can say with some precision, 95% of everything that is driving the universe today, which includes what we call dark matter, which I referenced in that quote, and what we call dark energy. Those combined, we can measure their existence, but we know nothing about them. They're driving 95% of what is going on in this universe. And each of those gets a full chapter in Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. I'm not going to let you get by unless you hear, know, and end up respecting, if not loving, how we came to discover the greatest mysteries in my field, dark matter and dark energy.
And Astrophysics for People in a Hurry is his latest book. Jess is calling in from Anaheim, California. Go ahead, Jess, we're listening.
Hello?
Hello.
Hey, I just want to say it's a great pleasure to talk to you. I'm a huge fan of your work.
Thank you.
But my question, you've talked about, especially with long-distance space travel, the importance of psychology and the importance of gravity. And so I have a background in psychology, and I was just curious, thinking about things like the synaptic gap and stuff like that. Would gravity, because everything that we've ever done, every experiment, every idea we've ever had, has had the effect of gravity on us. So if you were in a zero gravity environment for a long enough time, or say we populated a planet and evolved from there, where there's a different gravity, would that affect the transmission of electrical and chemical signals in the brain?
That's an excellent question, and I can say it's not likely, and experiments show that the answer is, in fact, no, for most things that matter. So consider the following. When you're standing up, and you have thoughts, right, and you're hungry, you love, you hate, whatever, normal sort of psycho-emotional thoughts. And gravity is pointing downwards. So now you just lay down. Now gravity is pointing out of the side of your head. And you have all those same thoughts. It's somehow your brain capacity is not deeply altered by this. Okay, so now you're still in a 1G environment, but the G is now pointing in a completely different direction. So you look at the physiologically, your veins. Why does blood circulate at all? Does it require gravity? Well, not really. Your blood circulates standing. It circulates horizontally. It circulates at any angle in between because your vessels pump on their own. So why should we think 0G, all of a sudden everything will just stop? Not only that, electromagnetic forces are 10 to the power of 40 times more powerful than gravitational forces. So all electrical synaptic phenomenon going on in your brain doesn't give a rat's ass about gravity. It is functioning completely independent of it. Now, chemically, you have chemistry going on in a liquid, let's say. Well, if the microbes are just floating around, they're kind of neutrally buoyant. They don't care about gravity either. They're floating in the water, suspended in the water. So that's if they're living, and the chemistry of molecules doesn't care either. So it's why any of this works at all under these very different conditions. Now, if you're in low gravity and you grow up in low gravity, that can affect your musculature, of course, because everything weighs less than it would on Earth. Now we bring you to Earth, that could be bad. You'll be a weakling person here on Earth unless you lifted weights to get up to this. Here's what you do on Mars. You counterweight everything to weigh as much for you on Mars as it would on Earth. Then when you come to Earth, everything weighs the same as you remember. That's the kind of thing you'd have to do. In fact, the movie that came out a few months ago, The Space Between Us, is about the first child ever born on Mars. And the child is raised there and he wants to come back to Earth. And they explore the medical problems he has. But among them, none of them is his capacity for thought.
This is a first. Mark DiFilippo is another longtime C-SPAN employee with 2 sons. And this is the first time, they don't send them in for the politicians, the kids. They send them in for you. But Jack is 14 years old. Drew is 12 years old.
Great age.
And according to Mark, they've been having a week-long debate about mass that even took place for a half hour in the grocery store. Jack, 14, wants to know that since there is matter and antimatter, is there antimass since there is the existence of mass? Drew wants to know what mass there was at the Big Bang and what triggered it, which we've covered a little bit. But
right. Great question. So it's not obvious on first pass that antimatter shouldn't have antimass. I mean, think about it. It has anti-everything else. It's the opposite charge. And in quantum physics, it has the opposite of other certain quantum features that are not familiar in our everyday lives, but particles live with this, like spin and angular momentum, this sort of thing. But the simplest thing to ask is, if an antiparticle has antimass, should that mean that it has anti-gravity? And this is an implicit consequence of the question, does it have antimass? It turns out, no, it doesn't have antimass. So, nor does it have anti-gravity. And the equations of gravity are such that it doesn't matter what your mass is made of, it will attract you no matter what. Because your mass actually drops out of the equations. And all that matters is how far away you are from me to determine how much I'm going to attract you to me. So, no, there is no negative mass. In the original equations, when they were first seen, it showed up as a negative mass. And the big question is, how do we interpret this? And it got interpreted as having negative properties in all of these other regimes, opposite properties, justifying the term antimatter. Now, where did all this come from? Matter and energy are interchangeable. Where did all the energy of the universe come from? It's a frontier of cosmic research. We got top people working on it. But otherwise, we don't know for sure. And like we said earlier, it may be embedded as part of a multiverse. But then you ask, well, where did the multiverse come from? So one of these at a time. So we don't know. We don't know. But we know that it exists, and we're describing it ever since it came into existence.
Have you visited CERN?
No, I've not visited. It's on my bucket list, though. It's like the largest machine in the world is the European Center for Nuclear Research, and I think that's how you parse out that acronym. They've got the largest particle accelerator in the world, the Large Hadron Collider. That's what discovered the famous God particle now 1 or 2 years ago. So yeah, it's on my list.
George, Eagle, Colorado, please go ahead with your question or comment.
Dr. Tyson.
Colorado.
Dr. Tyson.
Yeah.
Dr. Tyson.
Yes, hello.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. I have a question that's always been interesting to me. Can we ever harness gravity and use it for propulsion?
That's a great question. If there's and you're right, that's been on people's minds forever. If there's a way to do it, we have yet to figure it out. And let me flesh out that question and imagine that we have some suitcase where we can harness the force of gravity or control the force of gravity so that we can either increase it or reduce it. So there's still people to this day who think that NASA has a room where you go in and you're floating, and that's the zero gravity room. But that's not the case. The closest we have to that is what we call the neutral buoyancy tank, which is NASA-ese for a big swimming pool. And astronauts working on the Hubble telescope and practicing spacewalks do it submerged in that swimming pool. It's in Houston, Texas. Russia has a counterpart to it in their sort of space center as well. So, because think, if you can turn off gravity right below the launch pad of a rocket, then that fuel that the rocket is using, oh my gosh, the acceleration it would give you if you went away from 0G than from 1G, for example. So, no, we just have not figured out how to control gravity in that way. It's always, as far as we know, been associated with a concentration of mass or energy.
January 29th, a tweet from Neil deGrasse Tyson. Seems the world goes batshit crazy every few decades, just long enough to forget the last time the world went batshit crazy.
Yeah, people reacted heavily to that one. What do I mean by that? The First World War, it's like, oh my gosh, is this what we call civilization? We're gassing, we're digging trenches and wholesale slaughter of other human beings. And then, a few decades later, the Second World War. 50 million people die. In fact, you can run the numbers on this. 1,000 people per hour were killed in the Second World War. 1,000 per hour. And you look today and there's maybe there's a terrorist attack and a dozen people are dead, and it's headline news of the last several days. I'm glad it's headline news, but that tells me how far we've come. When 1,000 people dying per day during the Second World War was not itself news. It was, land has taken more battle, we won the battle, or we've reconquered this. The terms are not how many people died. The terms are what political gain have we put into play. So what happens after that? A few years after that, then there's Vietnam, and you go further back, and then there's the Civil War and the slavery, and I don't know. I just felt compelled to reflect on this, wondering whether the natural urge is to sink back into some crazy behavior, and then we have to react to how crazy that is and slowly build ourselves out of it, just taking long enough to slip back into it once again. So, yeah, for me it was a sad tweet, but I want people to reflect on what has happened before, so that, because we can look back and say, they didn't know, what, they were crazy thinking this. How could they think this way? What were they thinking? Well, ask yourself in 20 years what they'll be saying about us. I do a lot of the reading of the history of science and the history of culture in books printed in the day, so that you feel what they're feeling, not just a recounting, but look at the words they're using and how they... we look back at the temperance movement and the banishing of alcohol and say, they're crazy. How could they have done that? If you read op-eds of the day in newspapers and magazines and articles in the Atlantic Monthly, it is filled with accounts of families that were torn apart by the drunken husband who comes home, and what cost this is to society. You just see the buildup. It's there. And if you were alive back then, there's no reason to think you would have said, no, you shouldn't do this, this is stupid. You just watch the wave take everybody with it, culminating in an amendment, a constitutional amendment. We don't have an equal rights amendment, but we had an amendment banishing the production, sale, and consumption of alcohol outside of church religious ceremonies. And so what will people in 20 years be reading about today to say, what were you guys thinking? It's obvious. Can't you see through the forest for the trees? I wonder. So I think about this all the time, hence the tweet.
Any significance to the fact that it went out January 29th, the week after the inaugural?
I'm sure there was something that week that was just people just reacting. I mean, it wasn't so much the election, but there's the election plus the reaction to the election plus what he says about the election and the inauguration and I think it was just the total conduct of everybody. Just at odds with one another, at war with one another, at killing one another, saying things that you can't imagine in a civilized world you would say to one another. I was really just reacting to that.
You've worked on commissions for the past two presidents, correct?
I was on two White House commissions under President Bush, and President George W. Bush, and under Obama, we had met several times, but I was not on a formal advisory committee to him. And right now, towards the end of Obama and now into the Trump administration, I serve on a board of the Pentagon. So I have these occasional tours of duty when I'm called into Washington. I'm delighted to serve just as a citizen. If I have expertise and insight that can help governance, I would be irresponsible to decline such an invitation. So, and of course, it's unpaid. It's not. I mean, they reimburse, food and whatever, but it's otherwise unpaid. And so, it's my civic duty because they'll never pick me for jury duty. I'm 0 for 3 on that one. So the least I can do is help the federal government make decisions when and where they need to.
Just a couple minutes left with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Thomas in Tiffin, Ohio. You might be the last caller. Go ahead.
Hi, Neil. I really appreciate your passion for science and your sharing it with us. I have perhaps a simple question. In failure analysis and forensic analysis, you can often point to the center of an explosion. Now, the Big Bang is sort of like an explosion. Can astronomers point to the center of that Big Bang? And what would they get from looking in that direction and looking from other directions? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great. Thank you. So that's a great question. So the Big Bang explosion. So it's one thing to speak of an explosion of like a fireworks display or a bomb forensically, and then analogize it to the Big Bang. But there's a limit to where those analogies can take you, and there's a point where they fail. So because the Big Bang is an explosion, not only in space, but in time. It's a 4-dimensional explosion. There is a center to that explosion, but you don't have access to it. The center to that explosion was 14 billion years ago, when everything that exists today was in the same place at the same time. So you'd have to, so if you think of, we go back, you might have heard of this an analogy to the surface of a balloon, where we lose one dimension just so we can describe it. We lose one real dimension so we can describe it among ourselves in ways our human brain is wired to see it. So imagine our universe as the surface of a balloon, and you draw little spiral galaxies on it. And as you inflate the balloon, the distance between all galaxies grows. That's precisely what's going on in our universe. But it grows not because the galaxies are separating from one another within the space. It's because the space itself is stretching. And this is as prescribed by Einstein's general theory of relativity, and our experiments bear this out. So here is the universe now at this size, but yesterday it was a little smaller. And yesterday it was a little smaller. So if you want to ask, where's the center of this surface? That's like asking, where's the center of the surface of the Earth? The question actually has no meaning. You know to not ask that, because it's the wrong question given the geometry of what's going on. So, but I can ask a different question, not where is the center of this universe, the surface of the sphere. I can ask, when is the center of that universe? And the when is 14 billion years ago. So the timeline, in a sense, is this vector pointing straight out from the center through the surface of the universe that we live in. And as the balloon gets smaller and smaller, you're going back and back in time. Bam! That is the center of that explosion 14 billion years ago.
Let's fit Adrian in Memphis in. Hi, Adrian.
Hello. I'm in 7th grade. I saw you in Memphis, and Will meet you in St. Louis. My question is about black holes. I I want to know what is in black holes, why it is there, and how do you know it?
Great question. And you sound like you're in college, by the way, but you're in 7th grade. Okay, so there's hope for the world. A black hole. So I guess if you're in 7th grade, you would have been maybe 4 years old when I published the book, Death by Black Hole. So in there's a whole discussion about black holes and also how they can kill you. But what we know is if you're standing on the surface of the Earth and you want to escape Earth, unlike what your grandma told you, what goes up must come down, that's just false. It's true for most things. But there's a speed with which you can toss something so that it never comes back, ever, to Earth. And we give a word for that in physics. We call it the escape velocity for Earth. And for Earth, that speed is 7 miles per second. 7 miles per second. And when the astronauts went to the moon, they had to travel nearly that speed so that they wouldn't just fall back to Earth when they lit their engines and then turned them off. They need to have enough speed to get to the point where the moon can then pull them in away from the Earth. So they traveled like 6.8 miles per second. But anyway, it's about 7 miles per second. You can imagine if Earth's gravity were stronger, you would need a higher escape velocity to leave and never come back. That would make sense. The sun has a higher escape velocity than Earth does. It has a stronger gravity at its surface. Well, let's continue this exercise. It's something John Mitchell did, an astronomer from way back centuries ago. He said, suppose I had a star that has such high gravity that light traveling at the speed of light is insufficient to escape. If that were the case, the star would just darken and contain all the light that it wanted to generate. And he called this a dark star hypothesis. All right? And so this, it turns out, to do the calculation correctly, requires Einstein's equations, not classical equations of Newton, which he used. It requires Einstein's equations to get the correct right answer. But when you do this, you have what we call a black hole. And we have examples of black hole in the galaxy. No, you can't see them directly because there's no light coming from them, as you would suspect. Sometimes you can see distortion of the fabric of space and time in their vicinity. So the star field behind them gets distorted. You say, uh-oh, make a left instead of going straight in, because you don't want to get sucked into the black hole, drawn into its gravity. But the most common way we find black holes is when they eat. They flay stars and gas clouds that come near them, and it spirals down, gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and before it enters, it radiates brightly in ultraviolet and X-rays. We have X-ray telescopes as powerful as the Hubble Space Telescope. You just never heard of them because it doesn't take the pretty pictures that Hubble does. We have X-ray telescopes in space that finds and maps these black holes across the galaxy so that when the day we finally go space traveling, you know what to avoid.
Dr. Tyson, you have 1 minute to answer this question from your 2012 book, Space Chronicles, Friday, April 13th, 2029.
Oh,
what's going to happen?
So actually there's a close approach of an asteroid called Apophis. This is an asteroid we've discovered. Its orbit crosses Earth's orbit, and sometimes it crosses very closely. And in fact, April 13th, 2029, this asteroid, which is the size of the Rose Bowl, will come so close to Earth that it'll dip between our orbiting communication satellites and us. Now, those are fighting words. That's, these ones that go twice the Earth-Moon distance, 4 times the Earth. We call them close calls, but they're not. We'll just wave as it goes. This one, you're invading our space. And it turns out that this asteroid will not have a trajectory that will then hit us in 2036. There's a periodicity where we are in the same place as it in our orbit. And so the big worry was at that time, will it actually hit us? And the orbital calculations are good enough now to say that no, it will not hit us on either of those 2 days, but there will be a close approach, and it will be banner headlines when it does.
Well, Jeffrey Dunham wonders whether Earth's inhabitants should either be worried or not worried about errant asteroids.
Yes. One of several ways we will most assuredly go extinct is that we discover too late and too late to do anything about. It reminds me of this comic. It may have been in the New Yorker. There was one dinosaur lazily leaning on a rock, and the other one comes up to him and says, "I'm saying now is the time to build an asteroid defense system." And the dinosaurs are just laying there all lazy, just kicking back in their Jurassic laziness. Yes, we should have a defense system in place at all times, and we don't.
Neil deGrasse Tyson has been our guest for the past 3 hours. His most recent book is called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. This is Book TV on C-SPAN 2.